Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
We get to explore Excel charts and not just standard charts. We're going to create some really cool, modern looking charts using a variety of different techniques. So you're going to get to see a lot of different skills and some of those lesser known chart options. And I will preface this by saying the first chart that we're going to create is reasonably complicated. So I'm going to go through it at a slow pace so that you can understand what's going on. My name is Deborah Ashby. I'm a Microsoft instructor and Microsoft MVP who absolutely loves Excel. And I've been training and supporting Excel and other Microsoft products for over 25 years. So I'm going to be your host. I'm going to give you a bit of just an introduction to charts for those of you who aren't that familiar. We're going to take a look at or discuss briefly standard Excel charts versus modern Excel charts. We're going to run through some basic charting best practices, which are always good to know before you even begin building any kind of charts. And then we're going to jump into some chart building skills. And the charts we're going to build are not your standard average charts. So they're going to look a lot more modern than just your bog standard charts that you'll find in Excel. And this first chart, I didn't even know what to call this because I don't think it has a name. So I've gone with multi-series dumbbell chart. Somebody else suggested a sliding dot chart to me earlier. One of those two, I don't know what the name of it is, but it is pretty cool. So we're going to take a look at that first of all. That is the most complex one, so I thought we'd get that out the way first. We're going to take a look at an alternative bar chart. I'm going to show you ways of creating dynamic charts actually using functions as opposed to the charts option. These are pretty good. We're going to take a look at a donut chart, but a donut chart on steroids, just a way that you can make your donut charts look a lot more interesting and interactive. And then at the end, we're going to take a look at a line chart because those are really common. But I'm just going to show you a couple of things that I like to do to my line charts just to, again, just make them look a little bit more modern and bring them into 2024. So let's start out by talking about standard Excel charts. Now, most of us, if we've been using Excel for any period of time, we've probably inserted a chart or two into our spreadsheets. And you can see here on the screen, I've just got some screenshots of common charts that you might insert. Now, I've done a little bit of formatting to these charts, but these are basically just what you get if you were to select a data set and click on area chart or line chart or pie chart or bar chart. This is kind of what you'd get. I formatted them slightly, but this is kind of what you get. Now, these are absolutely fine. They're nice and clear. They're easy to understand. And don't think that I'm saying that you shouldn't use these charts anymore. You absolutely can. That's fine. But what we want to do is just really show you and expand your mind when it comes to visualizations and just show you some of the things that are possible and some techniques that you can use to bring your charts into 2024. Now, when we're talking about modern charts, this is kind of what springs into my mind. And you might note or you might recognize where these screenshots are from. These are from The Economist's website. And The Economist does charts brilliantly. They always have really awesome charts. They're really clean looking and they tell the story of your data in a really good way. And I'm a big fan of all the charts that you find on The Economist website. Even somewhere like McKinsey, they also do amazing charts to show different types of data. And this is what I would consider to be more modern chart design. Now, we're not going to get into anything particularly this complex, but what I'm trying to say to you is if you are looking for ideas, these are two really good websites to go to because you can just see all of the different types of charts they can create. So these don't look like your standard Excel charts. So we're going to kind of do a halfway house here, and I'm just going to show you ways to modernize the Excel charts. Let's take a look at some charting best practices because not all charts are created equally. Now, when you're thinking about representing your data in a chart, the key here is to keep your charts as simple as possible. Now, when I say as simple as possible, I don't mean boring. You can have what appears to be a nice, simple, clear chart, but it could be quite complex to construct. So this screenshot just here, this is what we're actually going to build in the first part. And I thought this was quite appropriate. I actually saw this on the Economist website the other day, and it was a very small thumbnail, and I was trying to get to look at it, but I don't have a subscription to the Economist, so I can't see all the charts in large. They also don't tell you how to put these charts together, so I was just going off of a screenshot, and I thought, that's really good. I'm going to recreate that. And this is based on the Euro Championships, which are currently going on. And as I mentioned, right now, England and Denmark are currently playing. So this is a chart that represents the top 10 teams in the Euros tournament by win probability. And you can see here, it's really clear. We have the names of the countries down the left-hand side. We have percentages running across the bottom from 0 to 100%. And then you can see win, final, semi-final, quarter-final, and last 16 at the top, and the probability that each of those countries is going to make it to that stage of the tournament. And I really love this chart. I think it really highlights the data well, and it's interesting. So this, when you look at it, is a simple chart to understand, but the building of this is complex, okay? As I said, we are going to build this first of all. Another thing that's really important is that you choose the right chart type for your data. Not all charts are created equally. And a good example of this would be the pie chart. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of pie charts at all. And that is because pie charts are only really good for displaying smaller data sets. So if you're trying to do a comparison between male versus female, they're good for things like that. But if you've got a lot of data points, then the segments end up really, really small. So they're not great for large amounts of data points. So once you've chosen the right chart type, depending on what your data is, then you need to make sure that there's a quick interpretation of the metrics. So the general rule is that when people look at your chart, they should be able to decipher what it's saying within 10 seconds. So it shouldn't take them any longer than that to work out what you're displaying on your chart. So keep it simple and keep it clear. Be mindful of your chart design. So we all love a well-designed chart, and how you use color and chart elements really matters. Again, anything that you add into your chart should really be there to highlight the actual data as opposed to distract from it. So always be wary of that, and functionality should always trump design. So if you're trying to make a decision between the functionality of the chart and the data that you can see and a design choice, always go for functionality. And then finally, be creative. Your charts don't need to be boring. You are not stuck with just the standard column and the standard bar chart in Excel. Make them interesting, make them engaging. Okay, so those are just some of my favorite charting best practices. This is the first chart that we're going to build. Now, what I've also put the instructions in this gray box down here, or just some pointers, because there are so many steps to this. I thought, you're never going to remember them unless you practice this a lot. It's very hard to remember all of these steps. So I added the steps in there. You have the workbook, you can follow through. It's going to be a little bit easier for you. So how do we build something that looks like this? Well, let's take a look at this chart first of all. What do we have on here? Well, this is actually a combination of two different charts. We've got a bar chart, and that is the grey bars that you can see running for each country horizontally. And then we have a scatter plot over the top. And the scatter plot is what is creating the dots that you can see just here. All right. So we've got two charts laid on top of each other, and we have to do a few different things to get it to this stage. So let's go to our workbook, the empty one, and let's start to build it. So this is our data. We've got our teams running down the left-hand side, and then we have the probability that the team is going to make it to the last 16, the quarterfinals, the semi-finals, the finals, and then the probability that they're going to win. Okay, so this is the data that we want to represent in that chart. Now you'll also see I've got 3 empty columns here with grey headings, and these are what we call helper columns. And helper columns, we add those in when we need to do some kind of calculation and bring it into the chart. So these aren't going to be part of our actual data set, but we need to have columns to do some calculations. So I've already put those in there. Now, the first thing that we need to do is we just need to build the bones of this chart. And if you recall, I said that the foundation is basically a bar chart because each country has a horizontal grey bar. The grey bar is 100% of the width of the chart. So the first thing I want to do here is make sure that we have a column which represents 100%. Okay, so in this percent column, I'm going to type in 100%. And we're just going to drag it down so that we have 100% in every single row. And what we're basically going to do is build a bar chart, but we're only going to use the team column and this percent column. So I'm going to hold down Control to select this column as well. Let's go to Insert, and then in the Charts group, we need to select Bar Chart. So we're going to click the drop down next to Column Chart, and this is where you're going to find not only your columns, but also your bars. And a bar chart is basically a column chart, but just running the other way. So we're going to insert a quick bar chart like so, and you can see what that looks like. Now we need to do a little bit of formatting to this chart, because the first thing you might notice is if we take a look at the team names, which are running down our axes here, can you see that they're reversed compared to the data set? So in the chart, we've got Denmark at the top, whereas in the actual table of data, we've got Denmark at the bottom. And you'll probably notice this when you're working with bar charts. It always does this. It always reverses them. And I find this really annoying, but it's not a problem because we can reverse the categories ourselves. So with the team selected, you can either right-click and go into Format Axes, or you can press Control-1 on your keyboard. And that's going to open up the Format Axes pane on the right-hand side. Now, in this Format Axes pane, we've got our axes options. And if you go down to the 3/4 of the way down, notice just here we have categories in reverse order. So if I click on this, it's going to switch those teams around. So now we have France at the top and Denmark at the bottom. What you'll also notice is that when we switch them around, it moves that horizontal axis to above the chart, which again, we don't really want. So a way to counteract that is go to the Format Axes area again, and under Axes Options, where we have horizontal axes crosses, choose at maximum category, and it's going to put it back down to the bottom. Okay, so that's sort of a nice quick way to reorder those teams so that they match your table. The next thing I might want to format here is this axis down here, because if you recall, this data that we're using is just this column data, the percentage. So where we had 100% in every single row, that's what we're currently displaying in this bar chart. But you can see that the chart axis goes up to 120%. And you'll find this again with Excel charts. They'll always give you a little bit more room at the end. Now, in this particular scenario, I want these bars to run all the way to the end. So I want to change or modify this axis. So what we're going to do is, again, go to our axes options. And where we have our bounds, minimum and maximum, can you see the minimum bound is 0, which is fine because we're starting at 0%. But the maximum is 1.2, so effectively 120%. So all we would need to do here is change this to 1, press enter, and you can see it's modified that horizontal axis. So now we have 0 to 100%, and all of the bars are the full width across. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to make each of these bars a little bit wider by adjusting the gap width. So if you ever want to make bars in either a bar or a column chart a bit wider, you don't make the bar wider, you effectively make the gap in between each bar smaller. So we're going to select the bars, and then in the pane on the right hand side, if you leave this pane open, it's going to take you to the correct place. Notice we have a gap width slider, and currently it's at 182%. So I'm going to change mine to 80, And that's going to make those bars or make them look like they're wider because we've decreased that gap width. And just a final little touch here, I'm going to change the color of these bars. Let's go to the Format tab. And we're going to fill these with a light gray color. And I'm just going to choose the lightest gray just there. So we've got the start of our chart happening here. Now let's make it a bit bigger, like so. So this is a good start. We're going to overlay our scatter plot onto this a bit later on, okay? But now we've got the bare bones of this chart. So if we want to overlay a scatter plot, we need to have some data to work with first. So what we're going to do is we're going to just select some data from our table and get it into the chart so that we can convert it into a scatter plot. Now, it doesn't matter which series of data you choose. You could choose the last 16 data, you could choose quarterfinals, you could choose semifinals, you can choose whatever you like. I'm going to go with last 16. And a quick way of getting this information into the chart is to copy, Control-C, click on the chart, Control-V to paste it in. Now it's going to paste it in as another bar. Now what we effectively want to do here is we want to change the bar that we've just pasted in, this orange one, to a scatter plot. So if we select it, right-click, change series chart type. And this will automatically jump you to the combo chart area. Now, a combo chart is basically just when we're combining two charts or using two different charts to represent two different series of data. So you can see at the bottom here, currently, the percentages, which remember are all 100% at the moment, are showing as a clustered bar. And the last 16 data I just added is also showing as a clustered bar. Now, we don't want the last 16 data to show as a clustered bar. We want it to show as a scatter plot. So we're going to scroll down and we're going to choose scatter plot and click on OK. Now, what you should see is just one dot on this chart, and that is it just there. Because what we've been doing, or what these values in this table are going to do, the ones for last 16, quarterfinals, semifinals, finals, and win, these values are going to tell Excel where on the horizontal axis we want the dot placed. And in a moment, we're going to add some values for the y-axis so that Excel knows how high up this y-axis the dot needs to be placed. So this is very much about positioning when you're working with a scatter plot, X, Y axes. So we've got one dot on here so far. Again, I want to make a couple of changes to this axis before we continue. So notice on the right-hand side here, where we have our vertical axes, this is showing as a percentage. Now, I don't want these to show as a percentage. I want them to show as a number. So I'm going to select the axes. We're going to go across to our axes options and expand them out. And all the way at the bottom, we should have number. Let's expand number. And you can see in here, this axis is showing in percentage format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to number. I'm just going to increase the decimal places to 1. So now we have an axis that runs from 0 to 1.2. Now, I don't want it to run from 0 to 1.2. What I want to plot down here, or what I want this to show, is I need this axis to help me work out the Y position of the dots. Okay, and this is quite hard to explain. So if this is sort of sounding a little bit complicated, I completely understand. You're probably going to need to go through this a little bit slower on your own. But we need to work out, we need to have an axis which is going to allow us to define where this dot gets placed. All right. So what we want to do, first of all, is we want to add in some values for our Y axis, because how far along this grey bar the dot is going to be placed is going to be generated by the values that we have in here. Whereas the y-axis, we don't have any information as yet. Now, the way that I'm going to calculate this is I'm going to take a look at how many teams I have. So if I take a look at the count in the status bar, I can see that I have 10 teams. So I'm going to double that to 20. And in the y-axis column, I'm going to put 20 in here. I'm then going to go down by 2 each time. So we're going to go 20, 18, 16. And if you've got a few in there, you should then be able to copy that pattern down. We're going to go all the way down to 2. You might be thinking, why on earth is she doing this? It'll all become clear in a moment. So we've got some y-axis values in here. Let's go back to this axis just here, because what we want to do is we want to change the bounds. Okay, so underneath axis options, we want the minimum to be 0, but now I want the maximum value to be the maximum value in our y-axis column. So I'm going to change this to 20. So it looks something like that. So now we have a y-axis that's going down by 2 each time, 20, 18, 16, 14. I actually want to display those middle values as well. So I want 19, 17 in there too. So underneath where we have units, major is currently set to 2. So if we change this to 1, it's going to give us those. Now, the reason why we've done it this way is because if we want our dot to appear in the correct position exactly in the middle of this grey bar, can you see now we have 19 is in the middle of that first grey bar. 17 is in the middle of this grey bar. All right. By using this method, we've managed to get it so that our dot is going to be exactly in the middle of the grey bar. So now that we have our structure, it's time to add in our data points. Now, if you recall, when we first built this chart, we added one dot down here and we used the last 16 data. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to go to select data. Now in here, we can see percent and last 16. So these are the current series that are in play in this chart currently. All right. Now the last 16, let's click on edit, because that was the one we kind of used when we were first building this chart. So we're going to reinsert this so that it looks a little bit better. So where we have series name at the top here, this is just the name of the series. So this is last 16. So we're just going to click the cell that contains the last 16 label. For the X values, we're going to delete out what's in there. And we're going to choose all of these values. And then the Y values are going to be what we have in here. Okay. Now, as I do that, can you see what's happening to the chart? We now have our dots plotted. Now, they're not in exactly the correct position at the moment. They need to be shifted down a little bit, but they're roughly in the right position. Okay. Let's click on OK. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to add a new series for each of my data points. So the next one, the series name, is quarterfinals. The X values are these values just here. And the Y values are these values. Click on OK. You can see the green dots have now been added. Let's go to the next one. This one's semifinals. We want our X values. And then our Y values are these ones just here. Click on OK. Series name, this one is for the final. We've got our X values, and then we've got our Y values. And then finally, who is most likely to win? So we want our label, we want our X values, and then we want our Y values. And click on OK. So we're slowly getting more towards what we want this to look like. So I have all my dots and their horizontal position is correct. It's based on the data. All right. Now the vertical position, the y-axis position, isn't quite right because we set this up 20 down to 2 in this y-axis column. And that's exactly what you can see on this axis. Can you see? We've got 20 at the top and this one goes all the way down to 0. Now I want to move all of these dots down so that this first row are in line with 19. The second row should be in line with 17 so that they're dead in the middle of that grey bar. So all we need to do is adjust our y-axis values to get this to work. So instead of 20, I'm going to have 19 in there. And notice as soon as I press 19, it moves that first row of dots down into the correct position. We can go 17 for the next lot. And then we can just copy these down because it will recognize the pattern. And like magic, those dots are basically now in the correct position relative to the X and Y axes. All right. Now, with these dots, that we do have a final couple of things left to do. We want to join or connect these dots so that it's like a multi-spot dumbbell chart. As I said, I don't know what you would quite call this. Now, the way that we join the dots, we're going to use error bars to join these dots together. And the way that we need to do this is we do need to perform a quick calculation. Because if we take this first bar at the top where we have France, we have our orange dot at the end, which is basically the maximum value. And then the green dot is the minimum value. And that's the same for all of these. The orange dot is always the largest value, and the green dot is always the lowest value. So in order to work out what the difference is between the highest dots and the lowest dots, we need to do a bit of a calculation. So we're going to do that in this column just here where I have bar difference. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to ask Excel to find the maximum value in this range of data. Okay, so it should find 96%. But then I want it to minus the minimum value in this range of data. Hit enter. Now, it doesn't matter if you have percentages just here or decimals, that's fine. And I'm getting this little green warning because it's saying that I haven't included formula omits adjacent cells. So it's saying that I've got a formula, but I haven't included an adjacent cell. Now, that's absolutely fine in this case, so I can ignore that error. So this is the difference between the maximum and the minimum value in each row of my chart. So we can use this information to connect these dots together. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the orange series and click on the top dot, and it's just going to highlight all of those orange dots. And then we're going to click on the plus, and we're going to add an error bar. Now, when you add error bars, it will try and add vertical and horizontal error bars. Now, we're not interested in the vertical error bars. We just want the horizontal. So we can select the vertical ones and press delete. So we've just got these little horizontal error bars. Now, we need to do some formatting to these, and we need to tell Excel how long they need to be. So I'm going to click, and this is easier said than done, on the error bar. And in the format error bars area, we need to make some adjustments just here. So the first thing we want to do is with the direction, we want to say minus because we don't want the bar going to the right of the dot. So we want a minus in here. And we're also going to say no cap, which means it's not going to have that little line at the top. And then error amount, this is where we get to define how long the bar is going to be. And this is where we're going to use that calculation that we just did. So we're going to go to custom and specify values. Now for both positive and negative, we're going to use the same data set. So we want this data set just here in both positive and negative. Click on OK. Check out what we have. We now have them all linked together. And this is all completely dynamic because of the way that we've built it. So, for example, if you take a look at France, let's just do the top one, just so you can see the difference. I want to do the win. Let's do 50% there. There we go. You can see that everything updates. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now, at this stage, we don't need this axis on the right-hand side. So we can just simply delete that out. So then with this chart, you can take it, you can do whatever you like with it. You could add a chart title. You could maybe copy and paste it onto some kind of dashboard. And it's just a really nice way of representing your data. All right, so quite a complicated chart. I did warn you at the beginning that this was going to be a complicated chart with a lot of different techniques in there. But what I'm hoping to do in this lesson is just show you the possibilities when it comes to charting and maybe show you some things that you didn't know. Let's take a look at something that you might use more frequently, and that is what I like to call the alternative bar chart. So for this one, we have a very small set of data. So we just have the breakdown of eye colors for males and females at a specific company. And we want to display this data in a bar chart. So let's select the data, let's go up to Insert, click the drop down, and then go to, this time we want this one just here, the 100% stacked bar chart, because that is going to give us this effect just here. So if you just wanted a standard Excel bar chart, that's what this is going to look like when you choose the 100% stacked. Now, once again, with this chart, can you see it's reversed the categories? So instead of blue, brown, green, hazel, we've got hazel, green, brown, blue, so on and so forth. So I'm going to change that. Let's click on the axes. Let's go over to Format Axes, Axes Options. There it is, Categories in reverse order to switch those around. Now for this particular chart, we don't actually need to show this axes here. So we don't need these percentages because we're going to add them as data labels. So I'm just going to delete that. And that is the first thing you should do when you're formatting any chart, is get rid of anything that you don't need. So I'm also going to get rid of these grid lines just by pressing delete. I'm going to grab the legend, and this is just a text box. I'm just going to move this up to the top to get it out the way. And that's looking pretty good so far. We could go in and change the colors. Now I'm going to make these a bit lighter, just temporarily. So let's just make them a bit like that. We're going to change them to a different color in a minute, but I want to add some data labels, and I want to make sure that these are easy to see as we're formatting. And I think whilst we're here, let's change the gap width as well. Just make those slightly wider. Now with this first series selected, let's right click and add some data labels. And I'm going to do the same for this blue series. We're going to add data labels. So this is just displaying the value from the table actually on the chart. And if you do that, it means that you can normally delete the axes, which makes your chart look a lot cleaner. Now I want to display these numbers at the end here, at the end of the bar. So this is where, again, we need to format our data labels. So in the pane on the right-hand side, let's click on our label options and expand that group. And right at the bottom, we have label position. So I'm going to say inside end to move those across. Now we can do something similar with these values, but this time I want them inside base. That's kind of the effect that I want. I'm going to make them slightly bigger. So let's increase the font size and maybe make them bold. And I'm also going to change them to white font. Let's do the same with this one. Increase them once, make them bold, white font. And then I'm going to change my chart colors to something a little bit nicer. The reason why I made them pale is so that we could see these data labels as we were formatting them. So let's go to the Format tab, Shape Fill, and I'm just going to make this series red, and we'll make this series, let's make it a darker gray. Okay, so this is looking pretty nice. I'm quite liking how this is looking, but I do want to do something else. So the thing that really differentiates the alternative bar chart from the regular bar chart is the fact that we have dynamic labels and we have them positioned above each bar, which kind of gives this the look and feel as if each bar is a separate chart. So the first thing I'm going to do is delete out this axis just here, because we're going to have these axes labels above each of the bars. Now, in order to do this, we're going to use a text box, and this is a little trick here. You want to make sure that you click on the chart first of all, and then insert your text box. So we're going to click on text box, and then we're going to draw it where we want it to be. And I'll tell you why that's important in a moment, because the first one that we want here is this bar represents everybody with blue eyes. So I'm not going to type in the word blue. I'm going to make sure that I'm clicked on the text box. I'm going to go to the formula bar and we're going to type in equals, and then we're going to select blue from the table and hit enter. And then we're going to move this into the correct position just above. Now, the reason why I told you to click on the chart before inserting the text box is that it means that that text box is going to become part of the chart. So if you pick this chart up and move it around, the text box is going to go with it. If you didn't, or if you were clicked over here, for example, and then you inserted the text box and dragged it over here, if you were to move the chart, the text box wouldn't move with it. So that's a good little tip. Now, I want to add one of these labels for each of the eye colors. So the quickest way to do this is simply to select the text box, hold down Control and drag down, and then you can position. And then we're going to hold down Control, drag down, and position, hold down Control, drag down, and position. And of course, you can spend a bit more time positioning these than I am. And then we just need to go in and we just need to change the formula. So we're just going to change the cell that we're referencing. So for the second one, instead of blue, we want brown, which is cell A5. So we can just simply update the formula, A5. The next one is going to be A6. And the next one is going to be A7, like so. So again, the way that we've built this makes it dynamic. So if one of these values was to change, it means that the chart is automatically going to update. So if we change hazel to grey and hit enter, you can see that it automatically updates in the chart. All right, so that is what I like to call the alternative bar chart. And before we leave this, the chart title, if you've got a title in your spreadsheet, you can link to that instead of typing it in again. So let's click on the text box, go to the formula bar, equals, select the cell, enter, and it's going to bring that chart title across. And again, because this is linked, if this title was to change, the title of the chart will also change. Okay, so I really like this. I think it's a nice, clean looking chart. Let's move on to the next couple of charts that we're going to build. And these are a little bit different because we build them using a formula as opposed to using an Excel chart. And again, these are really cool because they're all completely dynamic and you can combine them with other things like conditional formatting to make them really functional. So what we have here in this first example is a little table that shows the reasons that people have left an organization and the percentage of people who said that that was their reason during the exit interview. So I want to put this into a really nice visual. And I'm going to do this using the rept function. Now, before we get onto the function, the first thing that I want to do is I want to bring all of these labels across to this cell just here. So what we can do, again, is just link. We can type in equals, link to the cell, press enter, and then we can drag down to fill all of those in. Now, this is where I want to build my chart. Now, what I'm going to build here is kind of almost a little bit like a dumbbell chart. It's going to be a line with a circle on the end and then the number. Now, the way that we can do this is we can use the rept function. So if we type in equals rept. Now, rept just stands for repeats. And the arguments that we have for this function is text and number of times. So we can specify a piece of text or a symbol and then the number of times we want to repeat it. So if I want a line, I could say, and everything that you put in as text needs to go within quote marks. So we're going to open a quote mark and then I'm going to add a dash. Now, there's various different ways that you can do this. I quite like to use the Windows symbols. So if you press the Windows key and period or dot, it's going to bring up your Windows emojis and symbols. And if we go to the symbols gallery, you can see under recent, because I've been playing around with this, I have dashes and circles, all different kinds of things in here. So I'm going to choose the dash. That's going to be the symbol I'm going to use. I'm going to close the quote marks. That's what I want to repeat, that dash symbol. And then the number of times I want to repeat it is going to be what we have in cell B5. Now, if I close that and press enter, it's just going to give me a line. What I want is I want a dot on the end of here, okay? And then I also want it to show the value. So we're going to go back in and edit this formula. Let's go to the formula bar, comma. So I want to join it. We need an ampersand in there. I'm going to open another quote mark and I want to have a dot on the end, okay? So again, I'm going to go into my Windows symbols, Windows key, period, back to symbols, and you could choose one of these dots. I'm going to choose this one just here, and I want there to be a space after it. So I'm going to press space and put in the quote marks because I then want to join it with the actual value in the cell. Now, when we hit enter, that's what we're going to get. Okay, so just to review that formula, we're repeating the dash 45 times. That's what we have in cell B5. We're joining it with this dot and the space after it, and then we have the value that's in cell B5. So this gives a really nice effect. We can then pull this down, and that's what we get. And the cool thing about this is that you can pretty much use any symbol. This is fun to play around with because you can get all different kinds of effects. And because this is basically text, we can change the color by modifying the font. So if I want these to be in a different color, I would just select them all, go to font, and then you can change them to whatever color you like. So I'm going to make these dark green. Okay. Now just to make this a little bit more attractive, let's add some formatting to this table. I'm going to select all of the data, and then I'm going to add some borders. So let's go into more borders. And I'm just going to add a light grey border that runs across the middle. Click on OK and see how that looks. And then if maybe I want to highlight to my management the top 3 reasons why people leave the company, I might just choose to highlight those in maybe a light green. But very quickly there, we have a really effective, interesting looking chart that is completely dynamic. So if this value was to change to 20, you can see that that updates. All right. So I really like rept for doing things like this. And there's so many different variations of this rept formula. I'm just going to show you another variation because this one uses, well, it's slightly different, but it uses conditional formatting. So below we have another little table where we have a list of employees and their job rating. So maybe this is their job rating out of 10. Now, once again, we're going to pull across all of the employee names first of all. So we're going to say equals, and we're going to link to this cell. And then we're going to drag down. Now, this time, notice just underneath the table, can you see in cell A25, I have a star symbol in here already. I put it there so you can see how you can basically link to a symbol as opposed to actually typing the symbol or the dash or whatever it is into the formula. So this time, when we're doing our rept, we're going to say rept. The text is just going to be this cell just here. Now, because I am going to drag this formula down to copy it down, I want to make sure that this doesn't move. So we need to press F4 to make that cell absolute. Comma, the number of times we want to repeat the star is in relation to the job rating. Close the bracket, enter, and if we drag this down, you should see that we get the relevant number of stars. Now, with this, we could also combine this with a little bit of conditional formatting. So maybe we want to highlight in our chart all of the employees who have a job rating of 8 or more. So a really easy and effective way to do this is to select all of the data, like so, and then go to conditional formatting. We're going to create a new rule, and we're going to use a formula. So what we want to say here is we want to say when the job rating is greater than or equal to 8. Now, the way that conditional formatting adds these formulas is it makes them absolute. So you can see that we have a dollar symbol in front of the row and the column. If I was just to leave this as it is, it's not going to work correctly. I'm not going to get the effect that I want. We need to remove the dollar symbol from the row. So we're just locking the column. All right. And then we can choose the formatting that we want to apply. So for any students who score 8 or above, I want the font to be, let's stick with a nice dark green theme. And I want the fill background to be a light grey. Click on OK, click on OK, and you can see what that looks like. And again, this is completely dynamic. So if Emma Scone gets a 9, you can see that the conditional formatting kicks in. She's now in green with a grey fill background. So these are all really cool ways of creating modern charts which are dynamic. Now, there are a ton of different variations using rep that you can do. I would recommend that you have a little experiment with different symbols and various different things because you can get some really cool effects. I find that with donut charts, people don't really tend to use them to their full capacity. Because if you were just to create a basic donut chart, so let's just say I want to create a chart that shows the revenue for each of these fruits. So if we go to Insert and go to the pie chart drop down, this is where we have our donut chart. Now, a donut chart basically looks like a pie with the middle cut out. And I think that's all people think it is. It's just a pie chart with a hole in the middle. But donut charts are a lot more than that, particularly when you start adding in more series of data. Because if we delete this one out, you can see here I have some other series of data. So not only are we showing the revenue, we're showing the profit and also the cost. Now, if I wanted to represent all of this in a donut chart, I need to select all of the data, go to Insert, and down to Donut. And instantly, we have something that looks a lot more interesting. And this is sort of what we call, it sort of turns a donut chart into what a lot of people call a racetrack chart, because it looks like a racetrack. Now we're going to do a little bit of formatting here. And again, this is just all stuff which I do occasionally, which I think is really effective, particularly if you build dashboards and you're really trying to make your dashboard engaging and interesting. There's some really good techniques in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's Control-1 to open up the format pane. First thing I'm going to do is adjust the donut hole size because it's a little bit large. So let's drag this handle down and make the hole size a bit smaller. We're going to make it about there. Now for this chart, I'm not going to go crazy with the colors. Let's just make it quite monochromatic. So I'm going to go to chart design. Let's change the colors. And I'm just going to choose this monochromatic palette like so. You could choose more exciting colors than this. But let's say that my manager is really interested in grapes. And this is the series for grapes. Now, if you're wondering what we're looking at here, we basically have 3 rings, an inner ring, a middle ring, and an outer ring. Now, the outer ring, if we click on it, you can see in the table, the outer ring is showing the cost for each of the fruits. The middle ring is the profit, and the inner ring is showing the revenue. And my manager is interested in the revenue, profit, and cost, but only for grapes. He's obsessed with grapes. So I want to highlight grapes in this little donut chart. So grapes is this section just here where we have the darkest black. If you want to format individual segments, you have to click twice on the segment. If you just click once, it's going to select the entire ring. So any formatting you apply is going to apply to the entire ring. So you need to click again just to make your selection. Okay, and then we're going to go format, and I'm just going to make this red so it stands out for him. Click once, click twice, red, click once, click twice, red. Okay, so already I'm highlighting to him his favorite fruit, grapes. Also notice that I have a border around the outside of this chart, a very faint border. And again, I would recommend you remove this if you're adding it to dashboards. It looks a lot cleaner. So we just do that by going to Format and removing the shape outline, like so. Okay. Now, what else am I going to do here? Let's remove the chart title. I'm not going to have a chart title at the moment. It's not really particularly obvious looking at this chart, what's revenue, what's profit, what's cost. So I'm going to add some data labels. So let's click on the outer ring, right click, add data labels. Now you can see what happens as soon as we do this. It adds them, but it does look a little bit crowded and messy. It also makes the chart a little bit smaller once you start to add them. So I'm just going to drag that out to make it quite large again. Because in general, I don't really want to display the values on the rings. I just want it to say revenue, profit, and cost so that people know which ring represents what. Now you can change your data labels by formatting them. So if we click on the first set of data labels for the outer ring, go to Format Data Labels and expand our data label options, this is where we can specify what we're showing in our data label. So I've got value selected at the moment, so it's choosing the value from the table. But we can say series name instead and deselect value, and then it's going to show cost. So let's do the same for the rest of these. We're going to show the series name and deselect value. Click on these ones, show the series name, deselect value. So now I'm getting cost, profit, and revenue for every single one of my fruits. Now again, this is overkill. Maybe I only want these listed once and pointing at the ring that they refer to. So this is where we need to go through and delete all of the data labels that we don't need. And this is a little bit tedious. There's no other way around it. Because when we click on cost, again, it's going to select them all. So you have to click on the text box again if you want to just delete the one. So you have to click once, click twice, and we need to do that for whichever ones we want to delete. So I'm going to do it for all of them except one series. I'm only going to leave the ones in the darkest segment at the top there. So we want to select all of these like so. I want to grab the text box and I'm going to move it out. And you can see it has that little leader. So it kind of points at where it goes. So these are now pointing at the different rings that they represent. Okay, I'm going to make those bold. And again, you've got more time to spend formatting these, but that is a much nicer way of showing this data. We could go to town. We could add in pictures around the outside. So again, let me show you another thing that you can do to make your charts look really spectacular by incorporating images. So as I mentioned, my manager is obsessed with grapes. Let's add a picture of grapes in here. I'm going to go to Insert. I'm going to insert a shape first of all. I'm going to do a rounded rectangle. And let's make it about that big. I'm going to remove the shape outline. And we're going to fill this with an image of grapes. So in Format Shape, we want to go to Fill. And we're going to fill with a picture. Now, picture source. Let's click on Insert. I'm just going to grab one from the stock image library. So let's go for that. And let's search for grapes. And we'll use this one just here. Let's insert it in. Now, when you're inserting images inside shapes, and this is another quick tip, quite often you'll find that they'll sort of look squashed either vertically or horizontally. So always make sure that you resize your images inside the shape. Now you do that by going to Picture Format, going to Crop, and choosing Fill. That will keep the aspect ratio. You can then move it around and position it. I think that needs to go out a little bit. It's a bit of a tight fit. And then click the top half of the crop button. So that just ensures that your image doesn't look squished. Now I'm going to add a little border around the outside. So let's go for picture. I'm going to add a black border, but I don't want it to be that thick. Let's go for weight. I'm going to make that quite thin. And then I'm just going to connect this to the series that it relates to. So let's go to Insert, Shapes, and I'm going to use one of these lines. Let's just go for this one. And I'm just going to point it at what it relates to. And again, let's format this line so it looks a bit nicer. Over to Format Shape, Fill and Line. And this time I'm going to say, I want a solid line. I want it to be black. I'm going to make it thinner. So let's take it down to 0.75. And I'm going to change it to a dash to give it a nice effect. So I could go around this entire chart, add in images. I could even have some text underneath here, adding images that point to the relevant segment of the donut chart. And again, just to finish this off, I might click on the chart, Insert, Text Box, and add something in the middle here because it is sort of a big space that's begging for something. So let's put in fruit sales just to finish it off. These are all sort of styling tips and tricks, things that I do to make my charts look engaging. Here we just have some data related to average rainfall for 3 different cities. So Bangkok, London, and Delhi. And I want to represent this in a line chart. And I will say straight up front, line charts are for time-based data. So data that is going to change over a period of time. So maybe something like if you're trying to plot stock price fluctuations over the 24-hour period, or maybe sales revenue over a period of 10 years. Those would be the types of things that you can plot in a line chart. Must be time-based. So what we're going to do is going to Control A to select our data, go to Insert, and then in Charts, we can select line chart. So we've got 2D line charts at the top here. When it comes to 3D charts, my advice here is just stay away from them. 3D charts are a big no-no because they are just awful. Always stick with your 2D. We have different variations here, so this depends on how you want your chart to look. So I'm just going to do a plain basic one. So there is a bog standard Excel line chart. And then of course we can go in and the rest of it is really formatting. So let me just show you a couple of formatting tricks, things that I like to do. Now, if you have a chart where you have gaps at the top or gaps at the bottom, so quite often your lines will start sort of quite far up. So you might have a bit of a gap at the bottom or a bit of a gap at the top. Like you can see, our last data point is kind of here where we have Bangkok, 300 millimeters of rain. But my chart goes up to 350. So if I want to scale this a little bit better, I could adjust the scale that we're using. So I'm going to select the axes just here, go to axes options, and this is where we can adjust the bounds. So again, this is going from 0 to 350 currently. Our top value is 300, so maybe I want to say, I don't know, 310, something in here. And that's just going to bring it up, and it just removes any blank space that you have at the top. So it's always worth considering looking at those different bounds. Oh, it's gone to -40. Let's do a 0 there, like so. All right, so that's a way to scale your chart properly. Now, something else that I like to do with these is I like to make these lines smoothed. I'm a big fan of a smoothed line chart. So I'm going to click on the first line. We're going to go over to our fill options. And then underneath the line group, if we scroll down, right at the bottom, you have a smooth line checkbox. And when I click this, check it out. We now get a curvy line, which you may have seen people using in different charts. I'm a big fan of these. I think they look great. So we need to do that for every single line. So let's go back to here and we'll do smooth line. And this one as well, we're going to do a smoothed line. And I think those look much more modern and a lot cooler. Another thing that you'll see people doing a lot is creating sort of dark colored dashboard. The dark background theme is very popular when it comes to visualizations and presenting data at the moment. So just to show you a really cool way that you can do this and kind of create like this neon, I don't know, spaghetti chart, I'm going to call it because it looks like spaghetti. Let's go to chart design. And I'm actually going to change this. So we've got a dark background and I'm going to change it to that one. And then I'm going to select this blue line and let's make it stand out a bit. I'm going to go to Format, Shape Outline if we want to change these. And I'm going to make this a pink color. We're going to go for neon just here. Now, another way that you can really make this look neon is by adding a glow shape effect. So if we go back to Shape Effects, Glow, I'm going to add a pink glow. And you can make the glow as big as you like. I'm going to sort of be reasonably subtle with it, but it sort of gives a neon effect. So let's go and do this one. I'm going to make this a bright green. And again, I'm going to add a glow. Let's go for this one and this one. I mean, the orange is pretty good. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty good. Let's go for glow and we'll do this one. So very quickly there, we've created this kind of futuristic neon looking spaghetti / line chart, which again, it just elevates the regular line chart and makes it look a lot more interesting. And these look really effective on dark colored backgrounds or dashboards. So yeah, that was sort of really all I was going to show you is basically this smooth line technique and the glow effect. But line charts, really simple to create. The rest of it, you just insert it and the rest of it is really just formatting.
A big congratulations, everyone, for making it all the way to the end of this course. So it's just about time for me to sign off and say goodbye to you all. I hope you enjoyed running through this course as much as I've enjoyed teaching it to you. Once again, my name is Deb. Bye for now.
Hi, from everyone at Simon Says It. We hope you're enjoying this training lesson. Please like this video to show your support for the channel. If you want to take your learning further, earn a certificate for this course, and gain access to over 200 courses ad-free, click up there and go to simonsaysit.com. Thanks for watching, and back to the course.
The topic is something that we don't necessarily come across frequently when we're using Excel, but form controls are really useful if you want to add interactivity into your spreadsheets and make them dynamic. So particularly useful for people who analyze data, and create dashboards. My name's Deborah Ashby. I'm a Microsoft instructor and a Microsoft MVP. And I absolutely love Excel. I've been training and supporting Excel for over 25 years, and I'm going to be your host. So we're just going to go through basically what form controls are. We're going to talk about the different types of form controls that you have available in Excel. We're going to talk briefly about form controls versus ActiveX controls because a lot of people get confused about those two, so it's good to know what the differences are. We're going to talk a bit about the developer tab because if you've never used form controls before, you will find that they are all located on the developer tab in Excel, which isn't turned on by default. So I'll go through, I'll show you how to do that. And then we're going to dive into some form controls. So we're going to take a look at the combo box, the old checkbox, and also the new checkboxes, which are only available in Excel 365 at the moment. I will speak about that a bit more when we get to it. We're going to take a look at spin buttons, also option buttons, and these get gradually more complicated as we go through. So the last one, option buttons, we're going to combine those with an Excel chart that has a dynamic title. The examples I'm going to run through with you here are by no means the only way that you can use these form controls. Hopefully this will just give you an idea and you can think about your work and how you might incorporate them into the types of things that you do. Form controls in Excel are basically a set of pre-built interactive objects, and you can add them into your spreadsheets to facilitate user interaction, data entry, and dynamic content display. That probably doesn't mean anything to anyone until we actually get into an example. The controls, as I mentioned, are part of the Excel's developer tools, so you're going to find them on the developer tab. So you might want to just check now, see if you can see it. If not, don't worry, I'm going to show you how to turn it on. And they include elements such as buttons, checkboxes, combo boxes, and more. And they really are designed to enhance the usability of Excel workbooks without requiring any extensive programming knowledge. So they're easy to use and they're pretty simple for your users to use as well. So let's just talk quickly about the different types of form control because you'll see that we've got about 11 of them in there. But I am going to highlight a few of them. And these are the ones that I think tend to be the most well used, the most known, and the most useful. So you can see they're highlighted in green. Those are the ones we're going to cover. The ones which just have a green border around the outside, I'm going to touch on those. So group box, which you can see at the bottom, I'm briefly going to mention that when we talk about option buttons. We're not going to go into it in any depth, but I will mention it. So we'll see how far we get through the content. Now, as I mentioned, we access our form controls through the developer ribbon. So if you notice, if you take a look at my ribbons, I've got one called developer at the top here. And on the developer ribbon, we have a controls group and an insert button. This is where we find all of our form controls. Now, if you can't currently see the developer ribbon, then you need to turn it on. It's not turned on by default in Excel. Now, if you're not sure how to do that, all you would need to do is go to File, go down to Options, and from Excel Options, you want to go to the Customize Ribbon page. And on the right-hand side here, this is where we've got this little scroll bar. Just scroll down until you find Developer. You can see mine's in the middle there, and just make sure you have a check in the box. If you haven't got a check in the box, you're not going to see the ribbon. So that's what we're aiming to do here. So if you want to click on OK, you should find that you have the Developer ribbon. We're going to start out in this first example. As I said, we're going to be doing a combo box. Now, when we go up to the insert option just here, you can see that we have form controls divided down into two different groups. So we've got form controls and we've got ActiveX controls. So people always look at this and get a bit confused as to which ones they should be using because you can see that they kind of repeat. We've got checkboxes here, we've got checkboxes down here. So which set do we use? Well, the main difference between these two groups is that form controls, the top group just here, they're actually part of Excel. They're part of the application, whereas these ActiveX controls aren't. So they basically have their own little files in the operating system. Now, ActiveX controls are seen as a little bit more flexible, but the form controls are a lot simpler and much easier for most people to use. So in the session, we're going to be using all form controls. We're not going to touch on ActiveX controls. Now, before we actually insert our control, let's just take a moment to look at our data so that we can see what we're doing. And I'm sure when you look at this example, you're going to think to yourself, well, I could do that with a formula. I could do that with data validation. Yeah, you can. There are many different ways to do the same thing. But what we're going to do is we're going to insert a little drop-down box, which is basically what a combo box is. So it's basically an interactive way of selecting from a list. So very similar to data validation drop-down lists. Now, if you're not sure what a data validation drop-down list is, let me just take a second to show you what that is so you can see how they compare, and then I'll talk you through the differences. So I'm just going to go into a cell. Let's say that I want to create a drop-down list which just lists out all of these months. I can go up to the Data tab, into Data Tools, and we have Data Validation. Now, what we can do in here is on the Settings tab, I can say that I want to create a list, and then I can choose the source data that I want to include in that list. So if I want the months, I just need to select the month cells. Click on OK, and I get myself a nice little drop-down list, and I can select different months. And it might be that you've got various different formulas which are feeding off of this, maybe some charts, something like that. Now, a combo box form control is very similar to this. It has a very similar look and feel. Now, the main difference between the two is that when you create a data validation drop-down list, the actual values that you see in here are held within the cell. Whereas if you create a combo box form control, the values, so the months in this case, are held within the actual form control. So it makes it more flexible than data validation because you can literally pick it up, you can drop it anywhere on the spreadsheet. So if you're trying to design a nice dashboard and you want to move things around, then combo boxes are a little bit more flexible than your average data validation drop-down list. So with all that said, I'm just going to delete out this data validation. Let's clear it from the cell. Did I do that? Yes. Let's get rid of it and let's build one using form control instead. So we're going to go up to the developer ribbon. We're going to go into insert and we're going to choose this one just here, combo box form control. So let's click it. Now notice that my cursor has changed to a small crosshair, which means we can now draw in our combo box. And I want mine to be just here. So I'm going to draw it over here. And these form controls can be a little bit fiddly. Let's let go. And you can see I get something that looks very similar to data validation. If I click the drop-down arrow, currently there's nothing in there because we haven't told it the values that we want it to use. Now with these form controls, again, if we click on it, it's going to attempt to activate the form control. So in this case, when I click on it, it's going to produce the drop-down list. If I just want to select the form control, I need to hold down Control and click, and that will allow me to select it. Because we need to select it in order to format it and fill it with these months. Now, to do that, we right-click, and notice we have a little contextual menu here where we can go into Format the Control. And this is going to open up this little Control tab in the Format Control window. Now, notice what we have here. The first thing is Input Range. So this is basically what do you want to display in this list? And we want to display the months. So my input range is very simple. It's just going to be the months. Now, this is where it tends to throw people. Notice we have this field here called cell link. Now, what does that mean? You're going to see this cell link cell every time you use a form control. Well, the cell link cell is basically where the output of the form control goes. So every time we select a month from this drop-down list, there's going to be an output, and that output needs to go somewhere. Now, the cell that you choose can be any cell in your spreadsheet. It really doesn't matter. So I'm going to put mine just here, cell F2. The final thing here, drop-down lines. Currently, it's set to 8. Now, if I just kept it on 8, it means that for my little drop-down list, I'm going to get a scroll bar at the side because I have 12 months. So I'm going to need to scroll down if I want to select some of those months towards the bottom. So I'm going to change this to 12 so that we're accommodating all of the months. We're not having to scroll. Let's click on Okay, so now what will happen is if I click the drop down, you can see I get all the months. If I select April, notice what happens in that cell link cell over here. Can you see it says 4? So that represents the month of April. It's the 4th month. Now, Excel isn't clever enough to know that the 4th month of the year is April. It's basically just looking at this list and it's producing 4 because it's the 4th item, the 4th row. If I was to change it to June, it's going to change to 6, so on and so forth. So now that we have this position, this row number, we can combine this with a formula to get the revenue from this little table based on the month that we have selected. Now, what formula can you think where we can do a lookup, but we can also provide it with a row number? If you thought of index, then you would be correct. So if we type in index, the first argument of index is array. Now, if you're not used to using index and match or anything like that to use lookups, the way to remember this, and this is the way that I learned it when I was learning index and match, because I found it so complicated when I was first looking at it. The array, this first argument of index, is always the range of cells that contains what you want to return. So I want to return the revenue. So my array is going to be where we have all of the revenue. That's the array, comma. The next argument is row number. Now, again, if you're used to using index and match, it's at this point you go in and you do your match to find the row number. We don't need to do that here because we already have the row number we want to return. That is what we have in cell F2. So when I close the bracket and hit enter, it's going to return the correct revenue. And if I change it to April, for example, it's going to return the correct revenue from the table. So this is a different way of doing data validation, but we can pick this form control up and we can drag it around. We can place it wherever we want on the worksheet. Because those values are contained within the form control, they're not assigned to the cell like a data validation would be. Now, this data just here, I've got it on the same worksheet just to make it nice and simple for us to do these exercises. You could have this on a different worksheet altogether, and this form control might be on a dashboard, and it might be referencing the information that you have on a different worksheet. It would work exactly the same way. This is perfectly fine. Okay, so that is your first one, the combo box form control. Let's move on to the next one, checkbox. Now, I did mention that we're going to take a look at two different types of checkbox, and I'm going to call them old checkboxes and new checkboxes for distinction purposes. New checkboxes are only available in Excel 365. For anybody not using 365, this is the way you would add checkboxes. This is the old method, and that is using the checkbox form control. So let's take a look at it. And we're going to move this idea on a little bit because we're going to add formulas. We're also going to add a bit of conditional formatting in here so you can sort of see how these work and how you might incorporate them. Now, again, I've just got a small bit of data here. So I've got some bills that I need to pay. Everybody hates paying bills, but these are the bills I need to pay this month. And I want to add in some checkboxes so I can simply check when I've paid. And then at the bottom here where it says bills paid, maybe I want to have a count of the number of bills I've paid. Let's try that. First thing we need to do is we need to input our checkboxes. So if we go back to our developer tab, go to Insert, our form controls, there is the checkbox. Now I'm going to click it. My cursor changes to that small cross again, and I can go and I can draw this checkbox. And these are sometimes a little bit fiddly. So we're going to drag it out because what you'll notice here is that this checkbox comes with a little label, checkbox 1. So if you wanted to label these, you could. In this case, I just want to have the checkbox. So I'm going to click in here and I'm just going to delete out where it says checkbox 1. And let's just drag it in so it's not so huge. And then we're going to try and position it. So again, this is all a bit manual. We can sort of place it in the middle there. I think that looks pretty good. And if I want to copy this down to the other bills that I have, we can simply use our autofill handle. So where we have the small black cross in the corner, I can simply click and drag it down, and that's going to input those checkboxes in the cell. Nice and straightforward so far. Now, if you just wanted a visual list of checkboxes, as in you just wanted checkboxes here and you could say, okay, I've paid my gas bill, I've paid my electricity bill, I've paid my water bill. If you just wanted that visual check, then you're pretty much done here if that's all you want it to do. But we want it to do a little bit more than this because we want to add a formula down here and also a little bit of conditional formatting and almost show like a progress bar as we work through. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on the first form control. And notice again in the contextual menu, right at the bottom, we have that format option again. So we're going to format the control. Now, this tab changes depending on the form control that we've got selected. So I'm now using checkboxes. So the options we have in here are different to when we were looking at the control tab for combo boxes. So this will change depending on the type of form control. Now, what you see here underneath value, currently it says unchecked. This is really how do you want those checkboxes to look by default? So if you want them all to have a check in them by default, then you would select checked. I want them to be unchecked, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. The only thing we need to provide is, again, that cell link cell. So when we check this checkbox, where do we want the output to go? And I'm just going to put it next to the actual bill. Let's click on OK. So now when I check this checkbox, it's going to put true in that cell. When I uncheck it, it's going to put false. So the output of a checkbox is true or false. Okay, that's a nice little toggle we have there. Now we need to go through, and unfortunately there is no quick way to do this. You can't select them all and add a cell link cell. You have to do them individually, which is, to me, one of the biggest drawbacks of these checkboxes. Fortunately, that has been resolved in new checkboxes. But if you're using old ones, this is a bit of a pain because you have to go through. So we need to right click, format control. Cell link cell is going to be the cell next to it. Click on OK, check to make sure it works. Yes, it does. Now, another way we could do this is we could hold down Control and select the checkbox and press Control 1. That's a quick way of bringing up that format control. And then we can add in our cell link. Click on OK. Let's check to make sure it works, which it does. Another alternative way of doing this is to hold down Control and select the checkbox, and you could simply go up to the formula bar, type in equals, and then link it to the cell. So that is another quick way of doing a cell link. So let's just do this last one. I'm going to go to Format Control, and we're going to cell D8 this time. Let's check it works, which it does. So currently they're all set to false because I haven't checked any of these boxes. Now let's say that at the bottom here in cell C10, I want to count how many bills I've paid. So effectively, I'm counting trues because whenever we've got a checkbox checked, it's going to change to true. So we can use the COUNTIF formula. Now, we've got two arguments for COUNTIF, range and criteria. So our range is going to be these cells just here, D4 to D8, comma. What is our criteria? Well, we only want to count them if they say true, because that will represent how many bills we've paid. So we can just type in true, close the bracket, hit enter, and currently it says 0, which makes sense because I haven't paid any bills yet. Now, if I say I've paid my gas, my electricity, and my water, I can see that this month I've paid 3 bills. Now, what about if we want to move this idea on even further and maybe show this as a percentage and add a little progress bar in here? Well, what we can do, again, is we can go back to our formula, our COUNTIF formula, and we're going to say we want to divide this by the count, and I'm going to do a count A of all of the bills. And I'm doing a count A as opposed to a count because I'm counting a column that contains text as opposed to values. Okay, so we want to divide it by the total amount of bills. Hit enter. Now notice it's showing me a decimal value. And if I select all of these, it's going to show 1, which effectively means 100%. Okay, as I deselect, you can see this goes down. Now it's displaying as a decimal because we need to apply percentage format. So in the number group here, if we just click on percentage, we then get how many bills we've paid showing as a percentage instead. And the final step here is I want to add a little bar that represents this percentage. And you can probably start to imagine how this might be useful. It's a nice visual way. If you've got a big long list of tasks and you want to show a progress bar, this would be a great way to do it. What we can do is we can click on the cell and on the Home tab, go to Conditional Formatting. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a data bar in. Now I'm going to choose a solid fill one. Let's just go for this nice green data bar. At the moment, it's not working correctly. It's showing the full bar when we've only got 40%. So immediately, I'm going to go back into Manage Rules, and I'm going to edit my data bar rule, because we need to change a couple of settings down here to get this to accurately reflect how many items we've got checked. Now, in this minimum and maximum, currently that's set to automatic. So I want to change these to number. Now, the minimum value is going to be 0. The maximum value is going to be 100%. Okay, so I'm sort of giving it a guide. The minimum is 0, the maximum is 100. And when we click on OK and OK again, we should find that that bar updates. So as we click, we now have this nice little progress bar contained within one cell. And again, that's a really nice thing to add to a dashboard. Maybe as people complete tasks, they get a nice visual indicator as to how far through the project, for example, we are. Okay, so that is sort of how you can incorporate checkboxes along with formulas and a little bit of conditional formatting data bars in this case, which I think is pretty cool. Now, just as a side note, you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's fine, but I don't want these trues and falses sitting there in the spreadsheet, particularly if you're sending this to somebody else. It's not particularly great. People might wonder what they are or what they're doing there. There are a couple of different ways you can go about this. You could simply right-click and hide the column. That's fine. It's not going to affect the actual formula. Alternatively, if we unhide that, what you can do is use conditional formatting to hide them. So I could select all of these. Oops, let's just select the ones with text. If we press Control-1 to take us into Format Cells and click on Custom, what we can do, and this is a little trick, is where it says General, we can type in 3 semicolons. And when we click on OK, that will hide them from view. Now, they're still in the cell. You can see as I click on the cell, we can still see true in the formula bar. It just hides them from view so that they're not distracting. So that's a nice way of just quickly sort of hiding them so that people can't see them. Alternatively, just simply hide the column. Okay, so a few little tricks for you in there. This is pretty exciting, and I realize that not everybody might not be using Excel 365, and that is a bit of a pain if you're not. Sort of all of the new stuff gets released into 365 these days, so anything new, kind of really need to have that version. But these are really cool. And I will say, if you've used Google Sheets and you like their checkboxes, I think Microsoft have tried to copy that a little bit just here. They've tried to make them easier to use. And also they have a lot more functionality and they're a lot more interesting. So we can do things like change the color of the checkboxes. Like we can't do that with the old checkboxes that I've just shown you. So in this example, we're actually going to do a few different things in here. And that's because I'm trying to incorporate the usage of checkboxes into sort of tasks that you might possibly do. So what we have here is something that's reasonably similar. We have a list of tasks. So say these are tasks that I do every day. So we've got some task names, the description, and we have a status and a checkbox column, and I want to complete these. We also have a task number column, which currently isn't complete. Now, what we're aiming for here is I want to add some checkboxes in this column. When I click in the checkbox, I want to make sure that the status changes to complete, but I also want the actual task to grey out and appear with strike through. So what we're going to have happening here is a little bit of conditional formatting and some formulas as well. All right. Task number just here. I want to number all of these tasks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You might think to yourself, well, I'm just going to go through. I'm just going to type in 1, 2, so on and so forth. Now, that might be fine, nice and quick if you've got a small data set like I do here. But imagine if you've got quite a large data set. Typing those numbers in manually is a pain. Yes, you could type the first 2 in, select them both and use the fill handle to drag them down. But the disadvantage with this is if I decided that a new task needed to go in the middle here, so let's say I do insert, the numbering doesn't reorder itself. So now we've got a blank cell in here. This would be number 5. I would then have to go through and renumber everything that comes after it. Again, tedious. We don't want to be doing that. So let's make this a little bit more dynamic by using a formula. And the formula I'm going to use is the sequence formula. Now, sequence, again, is, I say, one of the newer ones. It's probably been around for, what, I lose track of time, maybe 2.5 years now. So a little while. It's not brand new, but sequence is available in Excel 365 and Excel 2021 for the PC and also for the Mac, I believe. And sequence will output a sequence of numbers, and it's dynamic. Let's type it in. I'm going to select sequence. Now, we've got quite a few arguments here. Only the first one is mandatory. Now, I know that I've got 10 items in this list. So when it comes to the number of rows, I could just say 10, close the bracket, hit enter, and it's going to number down 1 to 10. And if I was to try and insert something into the middle, just here, you can see that it renumbers everything. So you can see now it's renumbered that as number 5, but it hasn't added a new number as it's moved them down. So let's make this a little bit better. Let's undo. And what we're going to do is we're going to jazz up our sequence function. We're going to make this nice and dynamic. Instead of counting down the rows, again, because I've got a small data set, it's fairly easy for me to just count down 10. If I had hundreds of rows, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to get Excel to do it for me by adding in count A. Good old count A. And I'm going to get it to count the entire column. So I'm going to get it to count column C. Now, if I close count A off and close sequence and hit enter, that looks a little bit better. So now I've got my number 11 at the bottom. If I add a new item and press enter, it adds 12. Now notice when I press enter, it's adding the number first. Now you might want that behavior to happen. That's fine. If you don't want it to add the number until you've actually typed something into the cell, again, we can modify this formula. And we can just add in the middle there, -1. So now it won't add anything. Let me add something that's a bit more meaningful. So meditate. It's not going to add the number until I press enter. Then it adds 11. And now when I add rows in, it's going to renumber everything correctly. All right, so that's just an additional little tip for you when it comes to numbering. So now we've done that, let's get on to the main point of this particular exercise, and that is adding in our brand new, lovely, shiny checkboxes. This is so much easier and much less fiddly than the other way. So what we can do here is if you do have new checkboxes, you're going to find them on the insert ribbon, and you should have a group called controls where you have this thing called checkbox. Now I will say mine's moved around on the ribbon. So if you can't see yours in exactly the same position as mine, just scan across that ribbon and check to make sure it's not at the end or something like that. Now, if you don't have them and you're using Excel 365, this is being a staggered rollout and it's been rolling out for months now. So if you don't have them now, then you will have them very soon. So this will still be useful knowledge to know. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on checkbox and take a look at that. It adds a lovely checkbox in. You can see we now have nice rounded corners. And it puts it in the middle of the cell. Now, bear in mind, if you don't want it in the middle, you can change that by just adjusting the alignment. And you do that as you would anything else. If we go to the Home tab in the alignment group, if I want it on the left, I can change it there, on the right, or in the middle. And this works in exactly the same way. We can use the autofill handle and we can just drag this down for as many rows as we like. Now, one of my favorite things, and that's because I just like pretty colors, is that we can change the color of our checkboxes to match the theme we've got going on in our worksheet. Now, this struck me as a little bit strange, but in order to change the color, you need to select your checkboxes and you actually change the font color. I don't know how they've come up with that, but you change the font color and it will change the color of the checkboxes. You can see as I'm hovering over, they change it to all these nice colors. Let's do like a dark purple. And you can see the effect when we check. Those look a lot nicer than the old checkboxes. As I said, this is very similar to Google Sheets. So they've been stealing a few tricks. Now, when it comes to the functionality of these new checkboxes, they work slightly different. We don't need to mess around with cell link cells or anything like that. If I select this first checkbox, the output appears in the formula bar. So can you see it says true? All right. If I deselect, it says false. So we don't have to have them listed out at the side here in cell link cells. It's nice and neat. It's tidy. It's in that formula bar. Now, what I want to happen here is when I check a checkbox, essentially that means I've completed that to-do item. So I want it to output, first of all, a status of complete. So in cell E5, I'm going to add a quick if formula. And this is really, really simple. We're just going to type in equals if. Now, what's our logical test? Well, we want to say if this cell where we have the checkbox is equal to true, okay, which means it's checked. Now, if that's true, then we want it to output the word complete in the cell. If it's false, so if the checkbox isn't checked, we just want a blank. So we represent that with 2 quote marks. Let's close the bracket and hit enter. And you can see it says complete. Now I'm going to drag this formula all the way down. And we have nothing in the others because we haven't checked the checkbox. But as I start to mark off these to-do items, you can see it's going to put a status of complete in column E. So this is all working nicely. There is one final thing that I want to do here, just to give this a bit of added extra oomph. What I want to do is when we have a status of complete, I want the entire row, I want the font to go to a light gray, and I want a strike through to appear. So what we can do here is we want to select everything where we want to apply this formatting. And then we're going to go up to conditional formatting, and we're going to create a new rule. Now our rule is going to use a formula. Okay. Now in here, we're going to say if the cell E5, and notice when we select the cell, it automatically makes it an absolute reference. That's why we have those dollar symbols in front of the column and the row. Now, in order for this formula to work, if we keep it as an absolute reference, it's only going to apply formatting to the cell that we're currently clicked on because we've locked it to that cell. We need the formatting to travel across the row. So it means that we need to only lock the column. Okay, so we just want a dollar symbol in front of the column. So now we're saying when E5 is equal to complete. So when it says complete in that cell, what formatting do we want to apply? Well, I want the font to show in a light gray. And I also want it to show with a strike through. So let's click on OK and OK again and check it out. Everything that has a status of complete now is kind of fades into the background because it's done and it's got a strike through. So now when I go through my different items, we have that really nice effect, which makes it really obvious which tasks still need to be done. So that's another way that you can use the new checkboxes in conjunction with a formula, the if formula in this case, and also a little bit of conditional formatting. I think that's really cool. I use these new checkboxes all the time. Now, spin buttons are another form control that basically allow users to increase or decrease a value incrementally. So these are particularly useful for creating forms or dashboards where users can adjust values without actually having to manually type values in. And again, that's probably an explanation which won't make sense until you see it in a spreadsheet. So let's take a look at our spreadsheet. We've got a list of employees just here. We've got their employee ID. We've got a column where we're going to add our spin control. Quantity sold is currently blank, product cost, and total revenue is currently showing as nothing, basically. Now, in total revenue, I do have formulas in here. Okay, so I have a sum formula. We're basically doing the quantity sold multiplied by the product cost, which will give us the total revenue. Now, because I don't have any values in quantity sold, that's why this formula is just showing as a blank. But that's going to change in a moment. Because what we're going to do is we're going to add a little spin button control, which allows us to select the quantity sold. So let's go up to the developer ribbon. Again, in controls, we're going to click the insert drop down. And this time we're choosing, I wish they labeled these because I never know which ones they are until I hover over. There we go. Spin button form control. It's the fourth one from the left. I'm going to select it. Again, we get that tiny little cross, which means we're in draw mode. So we can basically draw our form control. So I'm going to draw mine just in this cell. And they kind of look like that. I always think these are quite 90s looking, these buttons. I wish Microsoft would jazz these up a little bit, but that is our form control. Once again, we can copy it down by dragging using the autofill handle. You don't have to have your form controls as wide as this. You can make these a little bit skinnier. I've just made them a bit bigger so that you can see them. Now, currently, if I click this up arrow and down arrow, it doesn't do anything. So you've guessed it, we need to format the control. So I'm going to hold down Control, click on the first one. We want to right click and we want to go to Format Control. Now, with these values in here, current value. Now, current value says 3. I don't want the current value to be 3. Let's just take the current value down to, we'll just say 1. Minimum value, I'm going to keep that at 1. Maximum value. Now, this is going to scroll through the quantity sold. So the minimum quantity sold is going to be 1. Okay. The maximum, well, that could be any number. It depends what worksheet you're working on. So let's just say that there is a maximum of 20 products in stock. So the maximum value that they can sell is going to be 20. Incremental change, I'm going to leave that as 1. And what that means is when I click either the up or down arrow on this spin control, it's going to go up by 1 each time. You don't have to have it going up by 1. I could put in 5 in here and it will go up by 5, so on and so forth. I'm going to keep it as 1. The cell link cell, that's going to be this cell just here. Let's click on OK. Now notice what happens. It starts at 1, okay? And as soon as we've got a value in quantity sold, the total revenue updates. Because remember, this is doing E4 multiplied by F4. So 1 multiplied by 10 is giving us 10. But I can use this form control and we can scroll up and it's changing the quantity sold, which effectively will change the total revenue. So you see these sometimes in use, again, on dashboards as an alternative way of entering in numbers. Now, again, with these, you have to go through and you have to do the same for each of the form controls, which I know is completely tedious, but let's just do a couple of them. I'm not going to do all of them. Current value, will take that to 1. You could have it as 0 if you wanted to. Minimum value 1. That's going to be 20. And then the cell link cell for this one is E5. I'm going to do one more because I'm going to use these to show you how you can create a little chart that automatically updates. Let's do this final one. Hold down Control, select it, right click, Format Control. And again, current value, we'll put that to 1, minimum value 1, maximum we'll have 20, and the cell link cell for this one is going to be this one. Okay, so here we can see an example of form controls which automatically update formulas because they're tied through. Now what I could do is I could use this data in a chart, and because we've only got information filled in for the first 3 employees, I'm just going to use those. So I'm going to select employees, Claire, Lewis, and Ming, and let's say I want to plot the total revenue. So I'm going to select that column as well. Now I selected those columns by holding down Control. Okay, if you want to select columns that aren't next to each other, just hold down your Control key. Now with this data selected, I can create a quick chart. I can go to Insert. Let's go and let's just create a little 2D bar chart. And there we go. And you can see we now have those employees listed in the vertical axes, and then we have the total revenue values at the bottom. Now this chart will automatically update when I use these form controls. So when I click this, can you see Claire Smith is moving at the bottom? Click it and it goes down. So I can change or essentially have kind of a dynamic element to my chart by linking all of this through using these form controls. Obviously, in an ideal world, we would have all of the information completed so we could add in Lucy and Gabby into the chart as well. But I think this illustrates this quite nicely. Again, this chart might be something that you want to copy and paste onto a dashboard. So a lot of the time you'll have all of your calculations, like this table we have here, on their own worksheets. And if you're building a dashboard, you'll just have the resulting chart. So you can then put these spin controls on the dashboard or have them here wherever you want to have them. All right, so that is an example of a spin button. Now, option buttons, again, are pretty cool. You see these often on Excel dashboards. They allow us to select different options, and other things in our spreadsheet will update depending on how we've set this up. So let's take a moment just to understand our data. Again, it's not particularly complex data. We have a list of categories. So we've got home, women's wear, and menswear. We have 3 categories. And then we have a bunch of items that belong to those categories. And we have the sales of each of those items. So what I want to do, the end result, I want to have a chart which has the categories as option buttons, and I can select home, women's wear, or menswear, and it's only going to show me in that chart the items related to whatever category I've chosen. Okay. Now there are a few steps to this. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our option buttons. So let's go to the Developer tab, into our controls, and this time we want this little one just here, option button, form control. So let's click it, and I'm just going to put mine over here. I'm going to draw the first one out. Let's make it that big. And again, we have this little label. Now I'm going to relabel this. So to relabel them, you just simply click, and you can right click and choose edit text, or you can just double click and then you can delete out what's in there and you can add your own label. So we're going to call this home. We're going to have one of these for each of the categories. Now, a quick way to do this is if you select this form control, so I'm going to control and click. If you then hold down the control button and then grab the outside border and drag, that will make a copy of that form control. Okay, it's a little bit fiddly, as I said. This is one of the disadvantages of form controls, is they are a bit fiddly. Now, you can move these around. You can nudge them using your arrow keys. So if you want to get sort of really detailed about how you're lining those up, you can. Let's change this one to say women's wear. I'm going to click on this one again. I'm going to hold down control and drag it for my final one. And this one is going to be menswear. Now, you can take your time to line these up correctly. I might just do a little bit of lining up. Let's try and line these up properly. You can use your alignment tools to do this. So you could select all 3 of these. And then on the shape format ribbon, you've got your alignment tools just here. Now, your alignment is basically based on the size of the box around the outside. So sometimes these don't align up perfectly, but we could do align top to get those in line. We could try and say distribute horizontally. And there's a little bit more of a gap in here, so let's just move that one over. You could fiddle around with these all day, but let's just do something like that. There we go. That's good enough for me. Now, one thing you'll notice about these option buttons is that when we select them, they only allow us to select one at a time. So when you add option buttons, Excel assumes that the option buttons that you're adding are part of a group. They're grouped together. So you can only select one. You can't select more than one. Now, most of the time, that is exactly what you want. There will be occasions where you might have different option buttons controlling different things on different parts of the spreadsheet. Now, if you wanted another set of option buttons where they're not controlled or not linked to these option buttons, this is where you need to add these into a group. And I mentioned at the beginning, we're briefly going to touch on the group form control. This is that time. If we go to the Developer tab and into Insert, you can see you have a group box option just here. So if I wanted to group these 3 together, I would just drag it around the outside, and that effectively makes those a group. I could then add more option buttons, and those will be independent of these ones. All right, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. Let's backtrack because I don't actually want those to be a group. So these are linked together and we need to format them and link to a cell. And the cell we're going to link is going to be F1 up here. So once again, let's right click and say Format Control. Now again, we have values, so unchecked, checked. So this is just how this currently appears. So this one is currently checked, hence why checked is selected. We just need to provide the cell link cell. Now I'm going to choose F1 in here. Let's click on OK. Now notice immediately the output is 1. If I was to select women's wear, can you see the output is 2? I can see I spelled women's wear wrong just there. Let me just quickly change that, just so we don't run into any issues. I've missed out the S in women's wear. There we go. That's a little bit better. And I'm going to move that along a little bit. So when we select the second one, the output is 2. When we select the third one, the output is 3. So we can then use this output in a formula and get our spreadsheet to do different things. So what we want to do here is, again, as I said, this is more complicated. If you're not used to this formula, then this might seem quite complex. It's actually quite simple when you break it down. But what we want to do here is we want to return the item and the sales from this table based on what we've selected as our option button. So if I've got home selected, the only thing I want to see here are the item and the sales that belong to the category home. So I'd expect to see these ones just here and this one just here. Now, the way that we can do this is to use the filter function. And again, filter is one of those newer, again, I say newer, again, this is about 2.5 years old. It's available in 365. I think it's also available in 2021, possibly 2019 as well. Now, what the filter function does is it acts like filter drop-downs that you might be used to, but it's in a formula form. So what we can say here is, notice the first argument is array. Now, much like with the index formula, the argument array is just what you want to return. All right, so I want to return the item and the sales. So I need to make sure I select both of those columns, comma. We then need to tell filter what we want to include. So I only want to include when the category is equal to whatever we've got selected in our option buttons. So in this case, home, because that's what I have selected. Now, we can't tell the formula to use a form control in the formula, okay? All we can do is link it to this cell just here where we have number 1. Number 1 means home, but we need to get Excel to translate that number 1 means home. Now, we can do this by using a function called switch. Now, if you've never used switch before, I think it's part of lookup functions. So it sort of belongs with VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP and things like that. And what switch allows us to do is say, in this example, turn number 1 into home, turn number 2 into women's wear, turn number 3 into menswear. That's exactly what we're doing here. So we're going to say switch. Our expression, well, that's this cell just here, F1. So we're saying when the value in cell F1 is 1, replace it or switch it with home. When the value is 2, switch it with women's wear. I'm just being really careful I spell that correctly. When the value in that cell is 3, switch it with menswear. And that is it. We can close off switch, we can close off our filter, and then when we hit enter, we should find now that the only items and sales values we're seeing in this little table are the ones that belong to the home category. And if we do a quick check, I can see that yes, that is correct. If I select women's wear, I now get those items. Menswear, I now get those items. So we've made a nice little dynamic formula using these option buttons. So now that we have this, let's take this a stage further. Let's incorporate a chart. So we're going to keep it on home. Let's select the entire little data set here, go to insert, and this time we're just going to put in a 2D column chart. So nice and straightforward. And I'm going to grab my little option buttons. So let's select them all. I'm just holding down Control, and I'm going to drag them down so that they kind of sit above the chart. And of course, you can format this chart however you like. We don't have time to do much formatting, so I'm just going to do a little bit here. Let's right-click, Format. I'm going to make these bars a little bit chunkier, so I'm going to take the gap width down to make them wider. What else can I do here to make this a bit nicer? Let's add some data labels. So I'm going to say right-click. I'm going to add the values on the end, which means I can get rid of this axes because I have the values. Let's also get rid of the grid lines to make it nice and clean. And that's kind of what you're aiming for when you're working with charts. You just want them to be really simple, really easy to understand, and remove anything that isn't necessary. So now we have this nice chart that updates depending on which option button we've selected, which I think is pretty cool. The final little thing I'm going to show you here is how to add a dynamic title. So currently, the title just says sales. Now, what I want it to say is sales by category, semicolon, and then whichever one I've selected. Now, to do this, we need to reuse the switch part of our formula. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit here to save my typing. I'm going to go back to this formula and I'm going to copy where we have switch. So I'm going to select all of this along to here. And I'm just going to Control C to copy that to the clipboard. So that's sitting on the clipboard. And then over here in a random cell, I'm going to start to build my chart title. And we need to put this in quote marks. I want it to say sales by category. I want a space in there. So we want quote mark. And then I want to join it. We need an ampersand in there. And then I'm going to Control V to paste in my switch formula. Now let's hit enter. Check out what happens. Sales by category home. If I choose women's wear, sales by category women's wear. So this is now a dynamic title. How do we get this into the chart? Really simple. We just select the chart title. We need to select the text box. And in the formula bar, we can type in equals and just link to the cell. Hit enter. And now we have a dynamic chart with a dynamic chart title, which is pretty cool. Again, this all works really well when you're putting together analysis or Excel dashboards. So a really nice quick way of making something interactive.
A big congratulations, everyone, for making it all the way to the end of this course. So it's just about time for me to sign off and say goodbye to you all. I hope you enjoyed running through this course as much as I've enjoyed teaching it to you. Once again, my name is Deb. Bye for now.
Hi, from everyone at Simon Says It. We hope you're enjoying this training lesson. Please like this video to show your support for the channel. If you want to take your learning further, earn a certificate for this course, and gain access to over 200 courses ad-free, click up there and go to simonsaysit.com. Thanks for watching, and back to the course.
Charts really are an important part of Excel, particularly these days as analyzing and visualizing data becomes a more and more sought after skill. Everybody's creating dashboards, charts, visualizations. It's very popular at the moment. My name is Deborah Ashby and I'm a Microsoft IT trainer. I've been a trainer for about 16 years now, and I've worked in the wider IT industry for about 27 years. So I've pretty much seen Excel evolve from a fairly basic application in the 1990s to the very complex product that it is today. We're going to start out with choosing the right chart. I'm going to speak very briefly about the difference between Excel charts and pivot charts in case you have any confusion with regards to those two. And then we're basically going to dive in and start creating some charts. And I'm going to show you some formatting tips and tricks that hopefully you are maybe unfamiliar with or have never used before. So we're going to start out with everybody's favorite, a clustered column chart. I'm going to show you some formatting that you can do to make it look really cool. I'm going to introduce you to something called Power Toys in Excel. This is going to help you when it comes to if you have specific colors that you want to use in your charts. I'll speak more about that when we get to it. We're going to do things like add slicers. I'm going to show you how to customize them again so they really look and feel part of your chart. We're going to talk about line charts. Again, I'm going to show you some formatting tips and tricks. We're going to take a look at how we can apply custom formatting to the chart axes. We're then going to move on to a stacked column chart. And this is really cool because I'm going to show you how you can build a conditional stacked column chart that basically changes color depending on what's going on elsewhere in the spreadsheet. And also how you can add a moving target line, which updates again if values change in the spreadsheet. And then we're going to end with map charts because these can be really cool. They do have a little bit of a drawback. So we're going to talk through that and I'm going to show you some tricks when it comes to putting together a map chart as well. not all chart types are suitable for your data. And I've just got a little example here just to illustrate that. So we have a very small data set just here, 4 different fruits, and we just have some prices for those fruits. And I've basically used this tiny data set and created 4 charts, and these are really 4 of the most popular charts that you see people using in their spreadsheets. So we have a pie chart, a column chart, a line chart, and a bar chart. And let's just take a moment to take a look at the different ways that these charts are displaying this data. Now, if we take a look at the 2 charts that are on the left-hand side, so for example, the pie chart and the line chart, these 2 really aren't great at displaying the data that we have. If you have values in your data set that are reasonably close together, like I do here, there's not too much of a difference between any of these prices, it makes it quite hard to determine which is the highest price, which is the lowest price, just by looking at the pie chart. We could start adding things like data labels to make it really obvious, but it's particularly hard for me to tell which one is larger out of this yellow segment and the pink segment. They both look reasonably similar. Whereas if we have a look at the same data but displayed in a column chart on the right-hand side, we can instantly see which one of those has the highest price and which one has the lowest price. So the column chart on first glance is a lot easier to interpret than maybe the pie chart. Also, with a pie chart, if you have a lot more data points, so I only have 4 items I'm showing in here, but if I had like 20 things that I wanted to display in my chart, the pie chart segments start to get really small and your chart can get really confusing, and it's just not a great way to display larger data sets. I'm going to explain to you a bit later on exactly what pie charts are good for, but for this type of data, not so great. The same thing with this line chart. If we take a look at this line chart is really showing me nothing. We've basically got our fruits running across the bottom. We've got the prices, and it's just showing me sort of these prices go down depending on the fruits. Now, this isn't really telling me anything insightful at all. And that is because line charts are generally best for time-based data. So what I mean by that is if instead of item and price, maybe I had the amount of fruit that sold between a specific period, so maybe January to December of 2022. Because I have a time element in my data, I could then use a line chart and it's going to display it a lot better. So line charts are better for time-based data that changes, okay? So again, this isn't really suitable for this type of data. Now, the other chart that we have here is the bar chart. And again, this would be suitable for this kind of data. A bar chart is basically just a flipped round version of the column chart. And you'll find that for a lot of your data sets that you're going to use, the column and the bar chart, they are good all-rounders. I always say, if in doubt, use a column or a bar chart. They do suit most types of data. Okay, the chart that you choose is really important when it comes to how effective the message of your data. Now, how do I know that my data is in a table? Well, there's a couple of ways that I can tell. The main one and the easiest way to tell is if you take a look at your ribbons running across the top, notice that we have a table design contextual ribbon. If my data wasn't in a table, I wouldn't be able to see this ribbon up here. You can also see I have these filter drop downs. Those automatically get applied when we convert our data set into an Excel table. Now, if you're not sure how to convert data to a table, you simply click in it, press Control T. I can't do it because I'm already in a table, and it's going to just ask you if your data has headers, click on OK, and it's going to format your data as a table. What is the point of doing that? Why do we put our data into an Excel table before we analyze it? Well, the reason is most data sets aren't static. Most data sets will change over time. So I'm probably going to want to add more records into the bottom of this data set. Now, if I have my data in a table, one of the good things about tables is that they auto expand and will accommodate any new data that we add into the bottom. So consequently, if I've built a chart off of this table data, it's automatically going to include anything new that I add. I just need to refresh the chart. I don't need to sort of go in and start messing around with cell references. So my first tip is always put your data set into an Excel table before you put it into a chart, because it's going to be a lot easier for you when it comes time to update it. That moves me on to my next point, the difference between Excel charts, I should say, and pivot charts. We can create an Excel chart off of any data set. So for example, if I go back here, this small data set isn't in an Excel table. If I click in it, I'm not getting the table design ribbon, but I can still create a chart based off of this data set. So I can go to Insert, I have all of my chart options just here. I can open up and go to All Charts, and I can select any of these and create a chart. Whereas with a pivot chart, you need to create that based off of pivot table data. So your data needs to be in a pivot table first of all, in order for you to create a pivot chart. So you do have two slightly different chart types there, and we do use them in slightly different ways. Now, in this first example, we're going to build a clustered column chart off of pivot table data. So I'm going to take the data that I have here. It's already in a table. We're now going to create ourselves a pivot table. And we're going to put it over here on the Column Chart 1 tab. So because I have my data in a table, I can go up to Table Design, and we have a Summarize with Pivot Table option just here. So let's click it. I'm going to put my pivot table on an existing worksheet, and that existing worksheet is Column Chart 1, and I'm going to put it just here in cell B3. Let's click on OK. So now I have my empty pivot table. I'm going to build a very, very simple pivot table because we don't want to start cluttering up our charts too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the market field and I'm going to drop it down into rows. And then we're going to grab the sales field and we're going to drop it into values. So what I'm looking at here is all of my data summarized by the market. So this is sort of like the region, and that's the total sum of sales for those particular markets. Now, before I create my pivot chart, I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting to this pivot table. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the number formatting so this looks a little bit better. So let's right click, number format, and I'm going to apply a counting format with 0 decimal places, like so. And I'm also going to remove the grand total because I don't want the grand total to be included in the chart when I create it. So let's jump up to the Design tab, go over to Grand Totals, and we're going to turn off for rows and columns. Lovely. So now my data is pretty much ready for me to create a pivot chart. So we're going to click in the data, up to Pivot Table Analyze. In the Tools group, we have Pivot Chart. So this is going to open your entire charts gallery. And this is what I mean. We have so many different chart types that we can choose from in here. And each of these chart types, each of these different categories also has numerous other variations of that particular chart. For example, in the line chart category, I could create a basic line chart, or I could create one that has markers. I can create a 3D line chart, so on and so forth. The donut chart, which is also a very popular chart that people like to use, is underneath pie. It's this one just here. It's basically a pie chart. It's just got a hole in the middle. Now, this leads me on to my first little tip here, and that is when you are creating charts of any kind, stay well away from the 3D version of anything. 3D charts are just really not great at allowing people to judge exactly what the values are represented in that chart. You can see this one, the perspective is all a bit off. It's very difficult to sort of be able to tell which segments are larger because of the perspective and the 3D element. So my advice to you, stay away from 3D charts. I'm sure there is a use for them in some industries, but in general, as a rule, stay away from them. As I mentioned before as well, with pie charts, I generally tend to like to stay away from pie charts, except if I have a very, very tiny data set. And when I say a tiny data set, I mean really comparisons between maybe 2 or 3 things. So for example, if I was analyzing a data set, maybe it was an HR data set, and I wanted to see how many male versus female people there were working at the company, I might use a pie chart for that because it's just two things that I'm comparing, male and female. And it's quite good for comparing two things together. It gives you a really good result. But anything more than that, I generally tend to stay away from pie and donut charts. Again, it's completely personal preference. That's just my feeling when it comes to pie charts. Use them with small amounts of data. Now, the chart that we're going to be creating is a column chart, and we're just going to start out with everyone's favorite, the good old clustered column chart. Let's select it, click on OK. Now, when you enter a chart, or a cluster column chart in this case, it's going to look like this. Now, it's displaying our data. It doesn't particularly look the best. It's not the most attractive thing in the world. We can definitely improve this by doing a little bit of formatting and tidying it up a little bit. Because what we're going to aim for is I want it to go from this, what we have on the screen, to something that looks like that. So this looks a lot better. It's also interactive. I can click on these little filters at the top here and the data changes depending on what I've selected. So this is a much more attractive looking chart than the one that we get when we first add it onto our spreadsheets. So lots of little tricks that we're going to use in order to recreate what we've just seen. Now, when you're looking at a chart or thinking about formatting a chart like this, the first thing you really need to think about is what data is absolutely necessary for people to know. People just want to be able to look at the chart and immediately be able to understand and interpret what it's displaying. So you want to try and make your chart as clean as possible. You want to remove from it anything that's not necessary to convey the message. So if I'm looking at this particular chart, the first thing that stands out to me is the legend. The legend, it just says total. I don't need it because I can already see the totals depicted in the chart. So this would be the first thing that I would get rid of. Now remember, with these different chart elements, they are just text boxes, so you can simply select them and press the delete key. Alternatively, you click the plus, go to legend, and you can just deselect legend to remove that from the chart. So that is the first thing that I would get rid of. The next thing I would probably remove from this chart are these grey buttons that you can see just here. Now, this one at the bottom acts as like a little filter. So if I wanted to filter specifically for different markets, I could use that. But in general, if I'm going to apply a filter to a chart, I'm probably more likely to filter on the pivot table as opposed to the actual chart. So I'm going to remove all of the grey buttons on here, again, to make this chart look a little bit cleaner. So we can right click and we can select hide all field buttons on chart, which is just simply going to get rid of those. So we're looking a little bit less cluttered now. What else do we want to do to this chart? Well, one thing I might want to do is I can see here, if I select all of the columns, these are representing the different markets. They're quite thin columns at the moment. Maybe I want these to be a bit chunkier, particularly if I'm going to add data labels where I have the actual value displayed within the bar. At the moment, this bar isn't wide enough to accommodate any of these sales values, so I'm going to make these a little bit wider. Now, when you're doing things like this, you have lots of chart formatting options available on the ribbons. Notice we now have a pivot chart analyze ribbon, a design ribbon, and a format ribbon at the top. So loads of options for formatting our chart. We can also find additional options in the right-click menu. So I can right-click on any part of the chart and I get more options in here. And these are very contextual. So what you see in this right-click menu really depends on what part of the chart you're clicked on. So currently I'm clicked on the columns. If I was to click down here in the data labels and right-click, I get a different set of results. Okay, so you have formatting options in the right-click menu. And of course, you have your formatting pane as well. And we can bring that up by selecting whatever it is that we want to format, in this case, the columns, and pressing Control 1 to open Format Data Series on the right-hand side. So when we open Format Data Series, check out what we have here underneath series options. We have an option to adjust the gap width. Now this is going to adjust the gap in between each of these bars. So effectively I can make these skinnier like so, or I can drag it down and I can make these bars a little bit fatter. And again, as I said, if you're thinking of putting your actual data labels inside these bars, you want to make sure that they're wide enough to accommodate whatever values you have. So I think I'm going to leave mine like that. So now that we've done that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to add some data labels. We can right click and we can add data labels, and it's just going to add the actual values from the pivot tables on top of the bar. Now, the good thing about doing this is that once we add data labels in this way, it kind of means that we can get rid of this vertical axis running down the left-hand side. Because we have the values displayed on the chart, we don't really need this there. It's just another thing that's kind of unnecessary, taking up space. We can get rid of it. So let's press delete just to get rid of that. And now we just have our data labels. Now we can format these as well. So if we click on one data label, it's going to select them all. You can press Control 1 again to open your Format Data Labels pane on the right-hand side. And there's lots of things we can do in here. One of the more interesting things that we can do, if we go to Label Options, this is where we can specify what we're showing in our labels. So you don't necessarily have to show the value from our pivot table. We could show other things. Now, I have a very small data set, but if I was to choose, let's say, series name, for example, that's just going to say total. If I choose category name, it's actually going to put the market as well as the actual value. So sometimes that can be really useful depending on the data that you're displaying. Now for me in this chart, that is overkill. And if we scroll down, we can change the label position. So currently I have these showing on the outside end of my bars, but I could choose to show them on the inside end. That can be quite a nice effect. And that's what I mean by having your bar wide enough to accommodate the actual value. We could put them inside the base. There's sometimes a bit of a problem with this because if you don't have a bar that's tall enough, it can look a little bit strange. Or you can put them on the outside end. That's always a reasonably safe option to put them just there. Now, something else that we can do here is maybe I decide that for these particular data labels, I don't necessarily need the currency formatting applied in here. I have it in the table, which is why it's been pulled through to the chart, but I could remove that by expanding number down here, and we can choose a different category of formatting. So if I format these as a number as opposed to a counting format, I can then take the decimal places down to 0 and I get a slightly cleaner looking number. So again, if space is a concern for you, you can do things like that, and it's not actually going to change it in the pivot table, it's just going to change it on the chart. Okay, so quite nice and useful. Now, another thing that you'll notice is that when you're putting together a pivot chart based off of pivot table data, notice that my pivot table data is organized alphabetically. So it's running from A to Z. So markets start with Africa, APAC, Canada, so on and so forth. And that's fine. It's displaying it in the chart in the same way, but it might be that you want to sort this. Instead of having it running A to Z, maybe you want it to run from largest to smallest, something like that. So this is where you would go to your pivot table. You can right click and you can sort largest to smallest, and it's going to change the way that that's ordered in your pivot chart as well. Okay, so don't forget about that. Sometimes it's a bit easier to read if you sort it in that way. So we're looking pretty good. It looks a lot cleaner to when we first started. There's still some other changes that we need to make. So let's start to talk about color. Now, when you create a chart, the default color that you see here is going to be based on whatever theme you have active in your Excel spreadsheet. So for most people, that might be the standard Office theme. If we go to page layout, this is where you can see what themes you have applied. Now, this is kind of the standard Office theme, which most people have by default. I've actually changed mine. I have my own custom theme. So that's what I'm using, but your colors might be slightly different. So if you want to change the colors of these bars, you can do it very simply. You can change the theme simply by selecting a different one from the gallery. Notice that it's also changing the font because these are themes. Themes contain colors, they contain fonts, and they contain effects. So you can use these. Alternatively, you can just click on the bars and go to the Format tab and use Shape Fill, and you can change them to whatever color you like. If you are a PowerPoint user, you might be aware of the eyedropper utility. What the eyedropper utility allows us to do is basically use it to pick up a color anywhere in the PowerPoint slide and use it elsewhere. So that's brilliant if you're trying to match colors or you're trying to use branded colors. Maybe you're trying to match a color from a specific logo. You can literally click on it and transfer it to something else on the screen. Now, unfortunately, in Excel, if I was trying to do that, if I click on these bars and go to the Format tab, and Shape Fill, this is where you would find the eyedropper utility in PowerPoint in this little section down here. But notice we don't have one in Excel. There is a way by utilizing a little Windows feature that can allow you to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to show you this example because I think this is really helpful. So let's just say this is our company logo and it's over here. And I want to color the bars in my chart to match one of the colors in this logo so everything looks cohesive and matches together. So this is where we can use a little feature in Windows called Power Toys to do this. Now, if you've never heard of Power Toys, it is something you have to install onto your PC. If you just Google Power Toys Microsoft, the first link that comes up is going to take you through to this website, and it's simply a case of clicking Install Power Toys. It's an official Windows thing, so you're not downloading anything nasty, and it's really cool. It allows you to do lots and lots of different things. It sort of extends the capabilities of your applications and of Windows, and one of the things you can do with it is you can utilize an eyedropper utility, which we can then use in Excel. So to bring up Power Toys, we need to press Alt Space. You can just search for Power Toys once you've installed it, and it will bring it up. It's this one just here. Now, as I said, there are lots of things you can do with Power Toys, lots of things. We're not going to get into any of these, but one of them is the color picker. Now, notice here the activation shortcut for color picker, Windows key Shift C. So if I know this shortcut, I don't even need to pull this up. I can just, in my Excel spreadsheet, press Windows Shift C, and it turns my cursor into a color picker. Take a look at that. And as I hover over colors in this logo, it's telling me what the hexadecimal value is. So if I have something very specific that I want to use, so maybe this orange color, I can just click. There's the hexadecimal value. I can then copy it to the clipboard, and I can then use it to color my chart bars. So I can then click on my chart bars, go to Format, Shape Fill, Fill Colors, and this is where we can paste in that hexadecimal value. Really cool. And you can see the last colors that you recently used are kept here as well. So that's a really nice little trick, because picking up branded colors can be a bit of a pain, particularly if you need to use a specific color in your chart. We're going to add a slicer to our chart. Now, a couple of tricks when it comes to inserting slicers and formatting them. If we click on our chart, go up to Pivot Chart Analyze, in the filter group, we can choose Insert Slicer. And what you're going to see here is a big long list of all of the fields from your original data set. So we can insert a slicer for any of these fields that we have in our data set. So I'm going to choose category. We're just going to have the one slicer. You can have as many as you like to insert that. Now, when you insert a slicer, they have a very sort of generic standard look and feel to them. And if I was just to leave this as it is, I mean, it works. It's going to work on my data. It's going to filter, but it doesn't really look cohesive. It doesn't look like it's part of this chart at all. And again, want to try and make everything look really engaging and like it's meant to be there. So what we can do here is apply some formatting to make this look a little bit better. Now, notice when I'm clicked on the slicer, we have a slicer contextual ribbon. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is, instead of displaying these categories running vertically, I want to display them horizontally. Now, we can change that by using, in this buttons group, where we have columns, currently it says one column. I can take this up to 3 columns, which will effectively allow me to display these categories running horizontally. I'm just going to expand them out. And let's move that up to resize it. So immediately that's looking a little bit neater. Another thing I might want to do is maybe remove this header information just here. So where we have category and then these buttons, maybe I don't want to display that. We can right click. We can go into our slicer settings. Notice here underneath header, currently display header is ticked. We can deselect it, click on OK, and it gets rid of that header. So we now have a much cleaner looking slicer. The last thing I would probably do here is I would create a custom style for my slicer so that it matches everything that I have in my chart. Now, when it comes to changing the colors of your slicer, we have a gallery of slicer styles. We have some dark styles and we have some light styles. And again, what you see in here are very much based on your theme colors. Now, I change my bars to match the color picked out of the logo. So none of these slicer styles are really going to work well. None of them are very similar to this orange color. What I would probably do here is create a new custom slicer style and use this orange color in the slicer. Now, it's very simple to create a slicer style. You just need to select the one that you're currently using. So you can see the slicer style that's currently in use because it has a border around the outside. So it's this one. Right click and you need to duplicate the style. You can then give your new slicer style a name. So I always call them my initials. And then you can go through and customize each part of that particular slicer. So one of the first things I'd probably want to do here is I don't really want that border around the outside of the slicer. So if I go to whole slicer and format, I can then set the border to none to get rid of that border around the outside. If I wanted to change the colors, I could then go into any of these and make them this orange color. Now, there's lots of different items related to these because you can have a different color if the item's selected and has data. You can have a different color if you just hover over it, a different color if it's unselected. So there's lots of different things you can change in here, but it's basically the same principle. You select what you want to change, you go into format. If you want to change the background fill color, you could do that. You can go to more colors, you can add your hexadecimal value, you can change the font color, you can do whatever you like. I've already got a slicer style or a custom slicer style, which I set up earlier. I basically just went through this process and changed things to the orange color. So if I cancel out of here, once you've created your slicer style, you're going to see it up here in the custom area. And you can simply select it and then you'll have your new slicer style applied and it looks a lot more cohesive with the rest of this chart. If I click away, you can also see that we have no border around the outside. So when I remove the grid lines from Excel, you can see it looks like it's supposed to be part of this chart. I also might want to remove the border around the outside here. So I'm going to select the chart, go to Format, Shape Outline, and we're going to say No Outline. And then you can move the slicer so it's a bit closer to it. And we have a really nice looking cohesive chart. This time I'm displaying time-based data because, as we know, when we're using a line chart, it works best for data that changes over time. So I have some months of the year and I have the sum of sales. So let's go in, let's insert a chart, and this time we're going to insert just a line chart. I'm going to do a lot of the same formatting. Again, I don't really need the total. That's kind of irrelevant in this case. So I'm going to delete that. And I'm also going to hide all the field buttons on the chart. Let's take a look at the data. So if you notice, the chart doesn't have all of the months. We have some gaps. So we have January, February, March, April, and then we skip over May. So there's obviously no data for May. June, July, August, September, but then we don't have October, November, and December because my chart is just going to show where we have data. So if I didn't have any sales in May, it's just not going to show it. Now, it might be that you're happy with it like that, but a much better way is to include all of the months, but just have it at 0 where there were no sales. So how can we change this to include any of these months? Well, what we can do is right click on the date and go into field settings, and we're going to go to layout and print, and we want to select this option here, show items with no data. When I click on this, it's going to show the items that don't have any data, and these little weird dates just here, don't worry about those. That's because I deleted a whole heap of data from the data set first of all, so I'm just going to remove those. We now have all of the months showing in the chart, but there's just no data. Now, this looks a bit weird because we have a broken line chart. I don't really want it to look like that, but I do want it to include all of the months. Now, it doesn't matter because what we can do is we just need to add a 0 in for all of these months to get that line to run correctly. So again, a quick way of doing this is if we right click, we can go into pivot table options, and we can say in this format group for empty cells show, instead of nothing, we want to show a 0. And that's basically going to join that line back up, but it's not going to be a broken line. It just goes down to 0 when there haven't been any sales. All right, so just think about that when you're working through your chart as well. Let's take a look at this little vertical axis just here. This looks pretty good. Now, sometimes if you have an axis like this and it's displaying values, it might be that your values are very, very long. If this was millions of sales, so if we had very, very large numbers here is what I'm trying to say, this can start to look a bit strange because your axis just has a very, very large number in here. So this might be where you want to start thinking about using custom formatting just to shorten the values that you're seeing. For example, I can see here, these are in thousands. We've got 2,000, 4,000, 6,000. Maybe instead of this longer number, I just want it to say 2K, 4K, 6K, 8K, things like that. I can do that using custom formatting. So if we click in the vertical axes, Control 1 to pull up format axes, and go all the way down to the bottom where we have number, this is where we can start to change the formatting. So if we go to custom, notice here underneath type, this is what you want to type in to format these numbers with K after them. Okay, I already typed the code in. Once you've applied one code to your data, it will be available for you to select from this drop down. So I did this earlier, so it's selected just here. You would type it into here and click add to get it to appear in the menu above. So this is the format that you need if you want to change that to 2K, 4K, so on and so forth. All right, so think about using custom formatting to shorten the numbers that you're using in your chart. Another thing you might want to do here is you might want to reorder the way that your chart's displaying these months. So currently my chart is showing the data from January to December. But what if I'm an accountant and I want to see this data based off of the financial year? So maybe I want to have the chart starting at April and going all the way through to March. A quick way of reordering everything is if you go to the pivot table, if I want to move April up to the top, I can simply select it, click, and just drag it up to the top, and it's going to rearrange it. So I could select multiple. So April, I want to move all of these. I can drag them up, and I now have my chart based off of the financial year as opposed to the actual calendar year. So again, another little trick, you can drag and drop to move things around. So let's do some fun formatting. Let's select the line. Again, Control 1 to open up Format Data Series. A couple of little cool things that we can do in here. If we jump across to Marker and expand Fill, this is where we can change the fill color of the specific markers on the line. But one little option that I quite like, because this is quite a fun little option, is this one just here, Vary Colors by Point. If you want to quickly add some color to your chart, if you click that, it's basically going to make each change in point a different color. So again, makes it look a little bit more interesting. If we select the line and go back to marker, if we don't want that, we can just choose a solid fill color. So maybe instead of vary colors by point, let's go for a pink line. Let's go to the markers option at the top, and I'm going to go to built-in, and I'm going to choose one of these markers. So underneath built-in, instead of just having a round marker, you can choose any of these symbols. And if you choose one of these built-in marker options, if I go for this one, you can then choose the size as well. So I could have this really large if I wanted to, or I could take this down, but I can make them more prominent so they stand out. Now I've filled the marker color with this pink. We also have a border around the outside. I'm just going to do that in the same pink. And then if I want to change the color of the line, of course I can click on the line, go to the line section, and we can change the solid line color to whatever we like just here. Let's change it to solid line, and I want all of them to be pink. So you can really sort of start to change things, jazz it up, make it look less boring. Another really interesting option, and something that I'm seeing fairly frequently, is instead of having an angled line, I've seen people using a smooth line quite a bit. So if you click on the line and scroll all the way down to the bottom, notice we have smooth line just here. If I click this, instead of an angled line, we kind of get that curvy line instead. This one is a stacked column chart, and this is a really cool little technique if you want to add formulas into your charts and also add a target line as well. Here we have a slightly different setup. So I've got some companies A to E. I have some sales figures for those companies, and we have a sales target up here. So basically what I want to do is I want this kind of effect. So what we have is a target line. So whenever the sales target changes, if I change this to 18,000 up here, the target line moves, and notice that those bars are conditionally formatted so that if they fall below the sales target, they show in green. If they fall above, they show in pink. And this is actually a really easy effect to achieve. We just need a couple of formulas and to add a few things into the chart. So let's go back to here and see how we set this up. Now, anything that you want to include in a chart, you need to make sure that you kind of add it into your table over here. So what I need to have a heading that says target met. I'm going to have another one that says target not met. And I'm also going to pull the sales target into this little table as well. Let's format these. Let's make them gray and just resize these columns. Now, this is going to seem a little bit weird, but even though I don't have any data in here yet, I'm going to create the chart first of all. So I'm going to press Control A to select everything. Let's go up to Insert, and this time we're just going to create a regular chart. It's not a pivot chart or anything like that. We're going to add a stacked column chart. So what we have here is the only data series that we have showing are the actual sales, because that's all we have in our table at the moment. But notice in the legend, we have a key for target met, target not met, and sales target, but we don't have any data for that as yet. So as we add data, because this is a stacked column chart, you're going to see this data pile up on top of each of the columns. Now, what we want to do here is we want to use formulas in this particular chart. So we're going to use an if formula to find out if the sales value has met the target or not. So let's type in equals. So if the sales value is greater than or equal to our sales target, I'm going to press F4 to lock because we want to copy this down. If that's true, we want to output the sales value. If it's false, I want a blank cell. So now when I close this off and copy it down, what we should find is that whenever the sales value has met or exceeded the sales target, we have the value in the cell. Whenever it hasn't, we have a blank. And I'm just going to apply comma formatting to make everything look the same. So we're going to do a similar thing over here. We're going to say if, and we're going to do another logical test, but this time we're going to test if it's under the sales target. So if the value is less than the sales target, F4 to make it absolute because we're going to copy down. If that's true, we want to output the value into the cell. If it's false, we want a blank. Close the bracket, hit enter. And this time when we copy it down, we should find we have those other values showing. So let's add some formatting. And notice as I'm doing this, it's stacking that information onto the chart. The final thing I want to add into here is the actual sales target. So all I'm going to do is link to the sales target cell. Let's press F4 and copy this down. Now you might be thinking, what on earth are you doing? We're going to make some changes now to make this chart look a little bit better. So I don't want my chart to display like this, but I have all the information that I need. So I need to make some changes as to how we're representing these different values. Now, the first thing here is these sales values, which is represented by the green part of this column, we don't really need those because we have those in these two columns just here. Our formulas are generating these values. So if I click on the chart, you can see here it's showing me the columns that are in use in the chart. We can grab the bottom handle and we can drag in to exclude those sales figures, and it's going to use the target met and the target not met values instead. The next thing we want to do is we want to change the sales target. We don't want that showing as part of the column. We want that to show as a line. So this is where we can click on the bars and change series chart type. At the bottom here, this is where we can define what type of chart we're using for each of our data series. So I want all of these to show as a column, but I don't want sales target to show as a stacked column chart. I want it to show as a line chart instead. And notice as soon as I change that, we get the effect that we're looking for. Click on OK, and we now have a target line, which hopefully will move when we change the sales target value in cell C2, which it does. Notice that those bars change color as soon as I start adding values in. Okay, so a really cool little effect. We can then go in and of course we can start formatting the line however we want. We can change the color, we can add arrows on the end, we can do whatever we like with this particular line. And that's all I've done over here. I've pretty much removed the grid lines. I've moved the legend up to the top and I've just added some arrows on either side of that target line. So that can be a really nice little effect and a really cool way to make your charts a little bit more dynamic. Map charts can look really cool. I always see them used in dashboards. And as you would imagine, the best type of data to use a map chart on is geographical data. I want to show you a little problem that does occur with map charts. I've got some states listed here, and these are states in Australia. Okay, and we'll just say that this is for a store and how much revenue they've generated by each state. So if I wanted to depict this in a map chart, I could click in the data, jump up to insert. In maps, I could go for filled map. Now, these can be a little bit slow to load, but when they do, this isn't going to display as I want it to display. And again, you might need to wait a couple of seconds for it to actually load up. There we go. The data that I've selected is just for Australia, but it's showing me the entire world. Now, why is it showing me a world map instead of just Australia? But that's because the map chart thinks that where I have WA in the pivot table, I'm talking about Washington State as opposed to Western Australia. So it's showing me the whole map because it thinks I've included US-based data as well as Australian data. So a way to get around this is you need to make sure you add the country in as well as the state. So if I delete this out, as soon as I add another column, Control-Shift+ is the shortcut key to add a brand new column. I'm going to type in country, and let's just make that bold. And if we add in Australia, a quick way to copy this down is just to select all of the cells, Control-D to copy down. And now if I do the same thing and insert a filled map chart, it's just going to zoom in on Australia. Okay, I'm not going to get that whole map because it knows I'm talking about Australia and not the US. So just bear that in mind when you're creating map charts. Another thing I would always advise you do is that you put your data into a table, because notice that currently this state just here, which is Queensland, is in grey, and I haven't included that in my data set. If I was to add this onto the bottom, so if I put Australia, QLD, and 20,000, it doesn't update. I would need to put this data into a table, Control-T, because then when I add a new line on the bottom, it is then going to update in the map chart. Okay, so put your data in a table. You cannot create a filled map chart based on pivot table data. Let me show you what I mean. Let's assume that this is a pivot table as opposed to just an Excel table. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to convert this. I'm just going to summarize with pivot table. Let's put it on an existing worksheet. Let's put it down here. We're going to add country to the rows, state, and revenue, basically trying to get it to look like the table above. And we're going to change the report layout to tabular form. Now, what I would need to do is to remove the grand totals and the subtotals, and I want to have Australia copied all the way down. So we can do this by report layout, repeat all item labels. So this is a pivot table, but if I try and create a map chart based off of pivot table data, so if we go to pivot table analyze and pivot chart, and we have map in here, notice we get an error. It says you can't create this chart type with data inside a pivot table. So if you're trying to do this, what you need to do is basically take the data out of the table first of all. So if you've got pivot table data, you want to Control C to copy it, and then you want to just paste it as plain text. So basically, so it looks like this up here. Okay. Then create your map chart based off of that new data, and you can always right click and choose select data and then point it back to the pivot table afterwards. Okay, so the point being here is you cannot create a map chart based off of pivot table data. It needs to be just table data, or you can copy and paste and then redirect back to the pivot table afterwards. A big congratulations, everyone, for making it all the way to the end of this course. So it's just about time for me to sign off and say goodbye to you all. I hope you enjoyed running through this course as much as I've enjoyed teaching it to you. Once again, my name is Deb. Bye for now.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.